Hey guys, tonight we step into the quiet streets of Bursa, where the air is warm, the cobblestones are slightly uneven under your sandals, and the day is winding down so lazily that even the pigeons seem to be yawning. You find yourself drifting along a narrow lane lined with small workshops and courtyard homes, each one giving off the faintest whiff of crushed olives, drying herbs, and wood smoke. It's the perfect sort of place to lose track of where you're going, or what time it is, or honestly, what century you're supposed to be in. And in case you're wondering, yes, if you were suddenly dropped into the real Ottoman Empire, you probably wouldn't survive this. The sandals alone would ruin you. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're settling in, let me know in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is for you right now. I love seeing our little sleepy community sprinkled across the globe. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're moving deeper into the lane, your steps turning unhurried as the sounds around you soften. The sun is slipping behind the tiled roofs in a warm orange retreat, leaving a wash of shadows that feel more like blankets than darkness. Ahead, the soapmaker's quarter is easing into its nightly routine, a ritual as old and reliable as the smell of olive oil embedded in every wooden beam here. You trudge toward the entrance, guided by a faint glow from within, the kind of glow that makes you think of warm tea, half-finished chores, and people who have been doing the same peaceful tasks for centuries. A mainstream historical fact gently settles into your mind as you step into the courtyard. Bursa was one of the early capitals of the Ottoman Empire, a bustling center of silk and soap production, and artisans here were known across the region for crafting some of the most prized olive oil soaps of the era. It's the sort of detail that makes you feel slightly more knowledgeable, like you could casually drop it into a conversation later. Though historians still argue whether Bursa truly overshadowed other regional centers or whether its fame just traveled better because merchants loved bragging. Inside the courtyard, you catch sight of a pair of apprentices slowly sweeping a thin layer of olive pulp off the ground, pushing the bristly brooms in unison like they're performing a slow motion dance. They don't look tired exactly, more like they've already accepted that tonight's chores will happen at their own gentle pace, no faster, no slower. One of them jokes that if they sweep too quickly, they'll wake the olive pits. It's clearly nonsense, but it's the kind of joke that makes sense after a long day of stirring enormous cauldrons. Your eyes move to the center of the courtyard, where a stack of wooden crates sits waiting to be used tomorrow. The crates give off a faint grassy smell. Apparently, the artisans line them with reeds to help the soap breathe while it cures. It's one of those odd, specific craft tricks you'd never guess. And right beside them, you spot another quirky detail, a small terracotta jug hung upside down over a peg. One of the soap makers tells you it's an old good luck charm. Nobody remembers why it works, but everyone agrees you don't mess with the jug or tomorrow's soap will refuse to set evenly. You wander deeper, passing a stone bench worn smooth by centuries of sitting, leaning, and probably dramatic sighing about olive prices. A light breeze drifts through the open archway, bringing with it another layer of scents: rosemary from a nearby kitchen, damp earth from the gardens outside, and that ever-present soap aroma, equal parts soothing and faintly edible. The combination makes you feel a little dreamy, like time itself is stretching out and getting comfortable. The master soap maker, a man with gentle eyes and a beard that seems specifically crafted for nodding thoughtfully, steps out of a doorway. He greets you with quiet warmth, the kind that tells you he's seen countless evenings just like this. He gestures for you to follow as he begins a slow walk through the courtyard. You match his pace, which is to say, barely faster than a confident snail. It's perfect. He points out a stack of firewood arranged with meticulous care, thicker logs on the bottom, thinner pieces on top. The pattern is deliberate. He explains that consistent burning temperature is essential for melting olive oil and lye, a technique Ottoman soap makers had refined long before most people understood why soap even worked. You nod, absorbing the calm expertise that radiates from him. Some scholars think this exact stacking method spread through merchant families along the Aegean coast, though others argued it emerged independently in several regions. Either way, the logs look proud of themselves. A faint clatter draws your attention to a corner where two clay pots sit cooling. The apprentices used them earlier to warm rosewater, one of the subtle fragrances blended into the day's batch. When you lift one lid, a silky wave of warm floral air floats up, wrapping around you like an invisible scarf. You feel your shoulders relax instantly, and you let out a quiet breath, as if the rosewater has personally granted you permission to exhale. Closer to the workshop door, a pair of sandals rests neatly side by side, one pair noticeably larger than the other. You're told that the larger pair belongs to the master, and the smaller pair to his apprentice, who insists on copying everything the master does, including his footwear placement. It's a charming quirk, though everyone admits it becomes a tripping hazard in the mornings. A stray cat pads across your path, tail upright and steps soundless. She gives you a cursory glance, decides you're neither a threat nor a giver of snacks, and moves on. Her name, you learn, is Sabun, which literally means soap, a little on the nose, but fitting. The sky above deepens into a velvety blue, dotted with early stars. The workshop doors are open, but the atmosphere feels like a deep exhale. You feel yourself settling into the rhythm of this place, where everything, from sweeping to chatting to simply breathing, moves at a restful, end-of-day tempo. A lingering thought crosses your mind, maybe you could get used to this. Maybe there's something soothing about spending your evenings in a quiet Ottoman courtyard where the loudest sound is the soft thump of a broom or the murmur of a sleepy artisan. And as you linger there, listening to the last hum of daytime activity slip into silence, you know the night has only just begun. You follow the master farther into the courtyard, where the last breath of daylight glints off metal bowls and glass jars arranged on a long wooden table. The shadows stretch and soften, giving the space that unmistakable early evening hush, the moment when work hasn't quite stopped, but everyone has decided to do everything more slowly, as if speed now costs extra. Lanterns sit waiting on hooks, their wicks trimmed, their oil reservoirs topped off by whoever drew the short stick earlier in the day. You wander toward them instinctively, drawn by the promise of warm, amber light. One of the apprentices steps forward, holding a flint and steel. You watch as he strikes them with a soft tesh, sparks sputtering into the air like tiny, disinterested fireflies. On the third strike, because in historical reenactment fashion it always takes 3, the wick catches. A shy flame unfurls itself, stretching upward with the slow confidence of someone just waking from a nap. The apprentice shields the lantern with his hand, checks the flame, and gently raises it to its hook. You stand back, admiring the glow as it spreads across the courtyard floor in thin golden ribbons. You take a deep breath, noticing how the scented air changes the moment the lanterns come alive. Heat loosens the fragrance of cooling soap trays nearby, releasing the earthy, sweet scent of olive oil, lye, and rosewater. The lanterns flicker over the trays, casting a sleepy shimmer across their smooth surfaces. These blocks, cut earlier in the day, are resting before their final cure, still soft, but with enough structure to hold their form. Their edges look almost edible, which is probably why everyone here has a story about a traveler mistaking soap for dessert. Historians still argue whether those stories are exaggerated or embarrassingly true. The master gestures for you to join him near the trays. Each block sits nestled in simple wooden frames, their tops marked with faint patterns pressed in with carved stamps. Some show curling vines, others small geometric knots. He explains that Bursa artisans often personalize their soap with these marks, tiny artistic signatures that helped families identify their work in local markets. It's a mainstream fact you might have skimmed past in a history book. Ottoman guilds valued aesthetics as much as utility, insisting even everyday goods should have a touch of beauty. But your attention drifts away from the master for a moment when another lantern flickers to life behind you. A different apprentice lights it with the exaggerated seriousness of someone performing a life or death ritual, though you suspect he's mostly showing off. He lifts the lantern with a flourish, nearly bangs his elbow into a wooden post, then pretends it never happened. You bite back a sleepy laugh, your second of the night, and he gives you a quick grin, the universal expression for please ignore that. You take another step deeper into the lantern-lit courtyard, your sandals brushing against the faint dusting of olive pits still lingering from earlier processing. As the sky finally gives up its last scraps of sunlight, the lanterns become the new heartbeat of the space, soft, pulsing, scattered little moons guiding every movement. And there is something strangely mesmerizing about being in a place where light is tended to with as much care as the craft itself. Another quirky or fringe tidbit slips into your mind as you watch the master adjust one of the lanterns. Some Ottoman workshops believed that perfectly trimmed wicks were essential for attracting good fortune. A flame that leaned too far to one side was seen as unlucky, a hint that tomorrow's batches might misbehave. So yes, even ancient soap makers had their version of I's Mercury in retrograde, but with more fire hazards. You move closer to the racks where the freshly poured trays are cooling. Each tray has a little clay tag set beside it, the name of the craftsman etched in tiny letters. The air around the trays is a degree warmer, and you feel your face soften into the heat like you've stepped into the gentlest possible bakery. Some blocks are still slightly glossy, reflecting the lanterns like small, sleepy mirrors. You trail your fingers just above the surface, not touching, because you've been warned they're still sensitive and prone to dents. You imagine the disappointed sighs of the artisans if tomorrow morning they found your accidental fingerprint immortalized in the soap. The master leads you to a small alcove where an older worker is trimming wicks on a cluster of lanterns not yet lit. He works methodically, cutting each wick to the same length, inspecting them with the seriousness of someone checking gemstones. You ask why the precision matters so much, and he explains, "A steady flame steadies the mind." It sounds poetic, but also a little like something he repeats to himself whenever life feels chaotic. You decide you might adopt it too. You hear low conversation behind you. Two apprentices argue quietly about whether the lanterns should hang higher or lower this season. One insists the heat must be kept away from the soap. The other believes higher lanterns cast too many shadows, making it harder to check if the soap is setting evenly. Historians still argue whether Ottoman artisans really debated such small details or whether these stories grew from later nostalgia. But standing here, watching two teenagers bicker politely about lantern height, you're convinced it's absolutely true. You follow the master toward another pool of lamplight, where a pair of workers are gently blowing out spent embers from earlier fires. Their silhouettes ripple against the courtyard walls. One of them coughs lightly as a puff of ash escapes upward. The other pats his back with the stiff, awkward courtesy of someone who's never sure how much comfort is too much. You smile to yourself, your third joke, worthy moment of the evening, thinking how nothing breaks the tranquil mood quite like inhaling yesterday's charcoal. The master pauses beside you again and looks around at the lantern-lit courtyard with quiet satisfaction. To him, this isn't just illumination, it's preparation, atmosphere, rhythm, the soft frame around the evening's remaining tasks. And you can feel it too, the way the lanterns shape the night into something warm, safe, and suspended outside normal time. You close your eyes for a moment and listen. The faint crackle of wicks, a broom brushing stone, footsteps measured and unhurried, soft conversation drifting like smoke. Everything exists at half volume, half speed, half urgency. This courtyard doesn't wind down, it melts gently into the edges of night. And so do you. You drift toward the workshop's main doorway, following the faint sound of a low, steady bubble, like a pot humming to itself in its sleep. The master gestures for you to step inside, and as you cross the threshold, you're wrapped in a wave of warmth so gentle it feels like the air is giving you a hug. The scent here is richer, deeper, more layered, olive oil thickening from liquid to cream. Lye dissolved hours ago, hints of herbs that cling stubbornly to the air. You take a slow breath, and even though you know you're basically inhaling the 16th century version of industrial fumes, it still feels oddly calming. Don't question it, just roll with it. In the center of the room sits the final cauldron of the day. A great iron belly on three sturdy legs, bubbling in a quiet, rhythmic pulse. Its surface ripples like a slow, motion pancake, and you can almost imagine it trying to decide whether to be liquid or solid. This is the last batch for tonight, the one the artisans call the moon batch, simply because it usually finishes around the time the moon peaks over the courtyard wall. No mystical meaning, just practical scheduling, though one apprentice swears the moonlight makes the soap smoother. Historians still argue whether such beliefs were genuine or just the result of too many late night shifts. You step closer and feel the heat kiss your cheeks. The master stands beside the cauldron, leaning lightly on a long wooden paddle as if it's a walking stick. He dips the paddle into the mixture, stirs with a slow spiral motion, and then pauses to observe how the liquid clings to the wood. It stretches upward like honey thinking about becoming a ribbon. Satisfied, he hands you the paddle with a little grin that says, "Go on, see how it feels." You take it, surprised at the weight. The paddle is smoother than you expect. Years of years have polished it to a woody gloss. You slide it into the mixture and begin to stir. Immediately you understand why this job must feel meditative. The resistance is steady but gentle, like stirring warm pudding that's trying to nap. You circle the cauldron once, twice, 3 times. With each pass, the scent rises, a warm olive sweetness that makes your shoulders loosen. The master nods in approval and murmurs, "Slow is best at night." You agree, even though you have no basis for comparison and would probably ruin everything if left alone. A mainstream historical fact floats into your mind, fitting itself neatly into what you're seeing: traditional Ottoman soap, making depended heavily on olive oil from nearby groves, and regions like Bursa and Edirne became known for using high-quality, cold-pressed varieties. The better the oil, the smoother and longer lasting the soap. You swirl the paddle again, imagining the countless pressings, harvests, and grumpy donkeys that went into creating tonight's batch. Beside you, one apprentice hovers with a small clay bowl filled with what looks like powdered snow. He taps your arm and offers you a pinch. It's salt, fine, almost silky. He says they use a little to test the mixture's readiness, because the salt interacts differently depending on how the ingredients have bonded. You sprinkle a tiny amount into the cauldron and watch as the grains dissolve into nothing, like they never existed. He gives you a solemn nod, as if you've just achieved some minor yet important rite of passage. You resist the urge to high-five him. A quirky tidbit emerges from the master as he adjusts the fire beneath the cauldron. He tells you that some soap makers used to drop a single pomegranate seed into the bubbling mixture as a charm for prosperity. Not enough to affect the formula, just enough to make the workshop feel protected. The seed had to be added at night, during the quietest moment, or so the superstition went. You glance around the room to see if anyone is sneaking a seed into this batch. No one moves. But you notice one apprentice giving the pomegranate on the windowsill a meaningful look. You decide not to comment. You continue stirring, and the sound of the cauldron becomes its own little lullaby. Glup, 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 the bubbles rise lazily and pop with almost polite restraint. Nothing splatters. Nothing hisses. Even the firewood seems to burn softer at this hour. A cat, yes, Sabin again, wanders into the workshop and circles the cauldron like an inspector. She gives the mixture a sniff, decides it meets her mysterious standards, and flops down beside a warm brick to nap. If only all jobs came with an on-site cat supervisor. As your paddle moves through the mixture, the master begins explaining how they judge the soap's thickness. Modern chemistry would talk about saponification curves and alkali ratios, but here the test is simpler. When the mixture coats the paddle in a thin, even layer without dripping too fast, it's nearly ready. You watch as he demonstrates. The mixture clings. He nods. You feel strangely proud, as if you personally contributed something more than a few lazy stirs. Two workers nearby adjust the iron braces holding the cauldron. They move with the quiet efficiency of people who have done this every day of their lives. One of them comments that the fire is slightly cooler tonight because the logs are from a different supplier. Wood that burns gentler, perfect for evening batches. The other mutters that cooler fires mean longer nights. They share a resigned sigh that reminds you of coworkers everywhere, united in universal, ancient grumbling. You notice the heat has deepened the mixture's color into a mellow golden hue, like warm caramel. The master motions for you to lift the paddle. You do, letting the mixture drizzle back into the cauldron. The ribbon falls in slow motion, piling softly atop itself. He watches carefully, then offers a small, approving hum. It's the sound of a man who trusts the night to finish what the day began. A bit of lye residue crackles near the rim. Barely a sound, but enough for the master to wave an apprentice over. The apprentice wipes it with a cloth specially kept for this exact task. You raise an eyebrow at this level of fussness. The master shrugs and says, "Clean edges make clean soap." You have no idea if he means that literally or as a metaphor for life, but either way, it feels profound. Another scholarly aside drifts through your thoughts. Historians still argue whether Ottoman cauldron stirring techniques were standardized across guilds or varied by region. Everyone seems to agree the best artisans guarded their ratios like treasure maps. You look at the master and suspect he has at least 3 secrets he'll never tell you, no matter how nicely you ask. The fire beneath the cauldron dims slightly as the mixture reaches its final phase. The master takes the paddle from you, gives the mixture a few last graceful turns, and rests the paddle across 2 hooks. The bubbling slows, the scent deepens, and the whole workshop seems to hold a breath. This is the last cauldron of the night, its quiet simmer the final heartbeat before everything winds down. You step back, feeling the warmth fade from your skin as you move away. The master gives you a small nod, the kind that says, "You did all right, even if you mostly just stirred in circles." And as the fire glows its final embers beneath the great iron pot, you sense the evening shifting, settling, preparing for the next quiet task in this long, nightly ritual. You step back out into the courtyard, letting the workshop's warmth slip off your skin like a heavy cloak being exchanged for something lighter. The night air greets you with a cooler touch, tinged with the unmistakable scent of olives, fresh, crushed, pressed, and transformed. It's a scent you're starting to recognize in layers, each one tied to a different step in the soap-making ritual. And as you wander toward the olive presses themselves, you notice how the entire courtyard seems to glow under the lantern light, as if the air itself has decided to exhale. The olive presses sit under a wide awning supported by wooden beams darkened from decades, maybe centuries, of oil splashes and weather. The stone wheels are enormous, carved from pale limestone, each one still faintly warm from the day's work. The ground around them glistens in places where thin trails of oil have seeped into the earth, despite every attempt to catch them in little channels carved into the stone floor. You move slowly, listening to the faint creak of the beams overhead whenever a breeze rolls through. 2 workers linger here, finishing their final tasks. One is wiping the edges of the stone basin with a rag that used to be white many, many olive seasons ago. The other is sorting through a pile of pits and pulp, humming a tune so soft it might just be the echo of a thought. He gives you a sleepy smile, the universal expression for "I've been doing this since sunrise, but I don't hate it." The master joins you again, stepping into the lantern glow with the same quiet authority he had near the cauldron. He places a hand on the large wooden press beam, the one weighted with stones to squeeze out every last drop, and gives it a gentle push, testing its tension. You hear a slow creak, nothing alarming, just the tired sigh of a tool finishing its day. He murmurs something about needing to tighten the ropes tomorrow. You nod, though your mechanical expertise is limited to. That seems squeaky. A mainstream historical fact rises to your mind as you watch him inspect the press. Olive oil production in the Ottoman Empire was a regional cornerstone, with cities like Bursa and Izmir supplying oil not just for cooking but for lamps, perfumes, and of course soap. The presses you're seeing, circular stone basins with heavy rotating wheels, were common across the empire and remarkably effective for their time. Some similar presses even survived into the 20th century, their designs barely changing. You're standing before a piece of history that proved too efficient for innovation to bother improving. A worker nearby lifts a woven mat from a stack, each one used to separate layers of olive mash during pressing. The mats look rough, like they could file down your fingertips if you handled them carelessly, yet they carry a comforting familiarity. He shakes one out, sending tiny flecks of dried olive skins into the air. They catch the lantern light as they drift down like miniature petals, or, if you're feeling less romantic, like oily confetti, you try not to inhale too directly. Breathing in history is one thing. Breathing in ancient olive dust is another. One apprentice approaches with a clay jug filled with freshly pressed oil. The liquid inside gleams like captured sunlight, thick and golden. He tilts the jug slightly so you can see its clarity, and you have to admit it's mesmerizing. The surface shimmers in the lantern glow, as if the oil remembers being part of an olive that enjoyed one last hour of sunshine before its transformation. You're almost tempted to dip your finger in, almost. The apprentice watches you closely, ready to intercept any impulse you might have. Smart kid. A quirky fact slips into the conversation when the master taps the stone wheel and remarks that some presses were believed to work better if the stones were blessed by a traveling dervish. One worker nods solemnly, adding that his uncle swears a dervish once blessed their family press in Edirne, and the oil flowed, like silk, for 2 years afterward. Historians still argue whether such blessings held any real social influence or were just a charming excuse for procurement bragging rights. You choose to believe both. You circle the presses, noticing details you missed earlier, grooves carved into the basin to channel oil into small clay bowls, wooden wedges hammered into the press beam to keep it steady, a small pile of broken pits that crackle under your sandals. One pit rolls forward when you step near it, tapping against another like a tiny knock at a tiny door. You resist the urge to apologize to it. The worker sorting pulp waves you over and shows you a handful of spent olive skins. They're soft and leathery, darkened from pressing. He explains that these remnants won't be wasted. They'll be used as fuel, fertilizer, or even stuffing for certain tools. In a world where nothing goes to waste, olive pulp gets the full VP treatment. It reminds you of modern zero-waste movements, except here it's not a trend. It's survival, routine, necessity. You feel mildly judged by the handful of plastic wrappers you left in your kitchen back home. Lanterns sway lightly overhead, brushing the beams with a golden glow. The presses cast long shadows across the courtyard, their shapes stretching like giant wheels dreaming of one more turn. You sit on a low stool near a stack of oil jars, feeling the warmth of the day still radiating from the stone floor beneath your feet. It's the kind of warmth that seeps through your sandals and settles into your bones. One of the apprentices sits beside you, rubbing his hands together. He tells you he can predict tomorrow's yield by the smell of tonight's pulp. You ask what tonight's smell tells him. He sniffs theatrically, pauses, then shrugs. We'll see. So much for ancient wisdom. Still, he looks pretty confident, and who knows, you might be witnessing the early stages of a legendary artisan superstition forming in real time. At the edge of the awning, resting on a small wooden bench, lies a set of carved wooden paddles used earlier in the day for transferring the oil. They're still shiny with residue, reflecting the lanterns like little mirrors. The master picks one up and runs his thumb along the curve, checking for splinters. These tools are cared for meticulously, and as your fingers graze another, you feel the faint stickiness of residual oil, not unpleasant, just earthy, honest, real. A quiet debate breaks out between two workers over whether tomorrow's batches should use oil pressed in the morning or afternoon. One claims morning oil is smoother. The other insists afternoon oil has more sun in it. Historians still argue whether such distinctions were genuine sensory differences or simply the occupational version of, my team is better than yours. Watching them, you suspect a little of both. The presses stand still now, giant sleeping beasts of stone and wood, resting after a long day of turning olives into liquid gold. The workers step away one by one, wiping their hands, stretching their backs, making soft sounds of relief that transcend language and era. You follow, leaving the presses behind, feeling somehow lighter, as though simply being near them has smoothed out a few of your own rough edges. Another lantern flickers as you walk back across the courtyard, and you glance over your shoulder for one last look. The presses remain in their nook, bathed in soft, steady light, waiting patiently for dawn and the first olives of a new day. And as you breathe in the quiet, the olive-scented night settles around you like a gentle exhale. You step back into the dim workshop as the last streaks of sunset fade into a purplish haze beyond the narrow alley, and you feel the temperature cool just enough for the air to thicken with the scent of olive paste, lye, and the faint sweetness of old wood. In this quiet hour, somewhere between the bustle of sellers packing up their stalls and the distant call to prayer settling into memory, you get to watch how you, a decidedly unhurried Ottoman soap maker, craft scents for neighbors who expect you to know their preferences better than they do. You can almost hear your modern self whisper, "I barely know which shampoo I use." But here, the stakes are gentler, and the ingredients are stubbornly simple. A bowl of lavender petals clings to the edge of the workbench, tossing out tiny hints of calm with every shift of the air. You drag your fingers through the bowl and release a faint rustling, like parchment pages arguing quietly. Lavender is not native here, not really. It always travels, always hitchhikes along trade routes that wind over mountains and into valleys. There's a mainstream historical fact that lavender perfumes were widely traded throughout the Eastern Mediterranean by the 15th century, but you're far more invested in how the petals cling to your damp fingertips, as though trying to stow away once again. You gently brush them into a small mortar, making sure not to lose any, mostly because sweeping in this era is a full-body workout, and you're already committed to avoiding any unnecessary cardio. Across from you sits the apprentice, who is technically supposed to remain silent unless you ask a direct question. But he hums softly, absent-mindedly, grinding dried rose petals with the concentration usually reserved for chess masters and stray cats stalking unattended fish. The kid's been here for 3 years, and he still insists that rose, scented soap is the future. You don't have the heart to tell him that historians still argue whether the Ottomans truly preferred rose above all other fragrances, or whether it was simply the most documented scent because scribes had an understandable bias toward the good, smelling parts of life. If you spent your days recording tax disputes and grain shipments, you too would lunge at the chance to write about roses. The lye mixture cools in its clay pot, the surface reflecting a small but surprisingly flattering version of your face. You raise an eyebrow. You look like someone who could give reasonably gentle life advice. Good for the branding. You tilt the pot slightly, listening to the slow glug, appreciating how the thickened liquid moves, almost like syrup deciding whether it wants to participate in this evening's activities. You whisper to yourself a quirky tidbit you once heard: some early soap makers tested their mixtures by dipping a feather inside. If the feather dissolved slowly, the lye was strong enough. You look around for a feather. You have none. Instead, you find a tiny scrap of reed pen shaving and decide that's close enough. It dissolves with all the enthusiasm of a student assigned weekend homework. You take a deep breath, the scents merging into a gentle orchestra of "please relax" notes. The apprentice adjusts the wick of an oil lamp, and the shadows shift like they're sliding into more comfortable positions. Even the shadows here have better work-life balance than you did back home. You stir the lye mixture into the warmed olive paste, and the two join reluctantly at first, like coworkers introduced at an office potluck. But then they blend into something smoother, silkier, promising tomorrow's bars of soap. With each circular motion of your wooden paddle, you feel the day's tension unravel a little. This is the part you love: the slow chemistry, the sense that you're persuading time itself to thicken into something useful. You reach for the lavender. The mortar feels pleasantly warm from the friction of your earlier grinding, and when you lift it toward the basin, a few stubborn petals cling to the rim before falling in with a barely audible sigh. They scatter across the glossy surface, spreading out into tiny purple constellations. You don't rush, you never rush. Rushing is for bakers trying to stop bread from burning, or for bureaucrats hoping to leave the office before more paperwork materializes. Soap, on the other hand, rewards the slow, the deliberate, the almost meditative. As you stir, you imagine your customers: the elderly woman who insists your soap helps her remember her childhood garden, the man who buys 2 bars at a time and swears one lasts longer if he sings to it, the shepherd who claims your lavender blend keeps wolves away. You doubt the wolves care about your scent profile, but you let him believe it. His conviction is good advertising. You also think about how many different households these bars will end up in, how many quiet wash basins, how many hands rinsing off dust after a day of work in the fields. You may not be changing the world dramatically, but you're certainly making it smell a bit nicer, which is a form of diplomacy overlooked in most history books. You nod at the apprentice to bring you the small wooden molds. He moves with the solemnity of someone carrying fragile treasure, though the molds are older than both of you and sturdier than most of the furniture in the building. They bear tiny carved motifs, geometric knots, curling vines, and one that looks suspiciously like a cat wearing a crown. No one recalls who carved that one. Historians still debate whether Ottoman artisans intentionally hid whimsical images in their molds or whether bored woodworkers simply couldn't resist sneaking in jokes centuries before memes. You press a thumb over the crowned cat, appreciating its smug little expression. The mixture thickens, clinging to the paddle in silky ribbons. You pour it carefully into each mold, tapping the sides to coax out air bubbles. The sound echoes gently through the workshop, tiny hollow thumps that feel soothing in a strangely parental way, like patting the back of a baby who's perfectly content and doesn't need burping. You form the final bar, smoothing the surface with a small wooden spatula. The apprentice looks at the crowned cat mold again and gives a tiny smile, as though imagining the future owner wondering why their soap seems to be judging them. The molds sit in neat rows on a low shelf, waiting out the night. They won't be ready until morning, but that's perfectly fine. This waiting, the way time slows to a cozy crawl, is part of the routine, part of the nightly rhythm you've come to cherish. You wipe your hands on a linen cloth and let out a breath you didn't realize you were holding. Outside, the alley quiets further. A distant dog gives one half-hearted bark and then decides wisely that sleep is more important. You wholeheartedly agree. As you dim the lamp, the workshop folds itself into shadows, each scent lingering like a polite guest reluctant to leave. You give the molds one last, approving glance. The scented soaps of the evening are complete, infused with lavender, calm, and only one questionable mem like cat. Your work may be small, but here, in this quiet space, it feels enough. You step into the quiet corridor that leads from the workshop to the small courtyard, and the air shifts immediately, cooler, gentler, touched by the faint glow of lantern light reflecting off pale stone. This is where the drying racks sit, waiting like patient old friends you visit each night. You pad across the worn tiles, your footsteps cushioned by dust soft as powdered chalk, and you feel that familiar sense of purpose settle over your shoulders. You've already crafted today's scents. Now comes the equally important ritual of checking yesterday's bars, the ones that have been resting, firming, becoming themselves. The courtyard is small, a modest square open to the night sky, though from down here you see only a sliver of stars framed by the rising walls of surrounding homes. A grapevine climbs one wall greedily, trying to learn architecture, its leaves trembling slightly in the warm breeze. Historically, Ottoman homes often included these little courtyards as private breathing spaces, tiny sanctuaries tucked between the public chaos and domestic quiet. You sit down on a low stool that wobbles aggressively, as if reminding you that furniture in this era is sometimes more enthusiastic than stable. The drying racks line the wall, three tall wooden structures with slatted shelves. Each shelf carries neat rows of soaps, some pale, some greenish, some tinted faintly by rose or saffron. You lift the first bar, a pale yellow olive soap, turning it slowly between your hands. It's firmer today, pleasantly weighty. When you press a thumb lightly against the surface, it responds with the dignified resistance of someone who has had a full night's sleep and is not available for drama. You grin at the memory of your modern life, where soap was something you bought absent-mindedly, usually in a two-pack while distracted by a sale sign. Here, it's a full personality. This bar alone has spent nearly 30 days in various states of drying, hardening, and occasionally acting temperamental when humidity decided to meddle. A quirky tidbit you remember floats up. Some households in the region once hung bars of soap in fabric pouches near storage jars to absorb odors, creating what amounted to little artisanal air fresheners. You briefly consider making that a new product line, Ottoman mood pouches. But then remember branding meetings don't exist yet, and life is better for it. You set the bar back down gently and move on to the rose, scented ones which squarely belong to your apprentice. He arranged them earlier with exaggerated pride, lining them up like soldiers at inspection. You examine one, noting the soft blush of color in the center. Historians still argue whether rose oil was truly this bright in everyday soaps or whether surviving examples darkened over time, shifting their hues like shy chameleons. But tonight, the color settles somewhere between gentle dawn and if strawberry yogurt were a personality. As you rotate the bar slowly, the courtyard's lantern flickers. The light wavers across the shelves in slow ripples, making the soaps seem to glow from within. It's strangely mesmerizing. So much so that your second joke of the night slips out. If these soaps get any prettier, we're gonna have to start charging an art tax. You doubt the empire handles artisan levies kindly, but the bars feel fancy enough that you're willing to risk minor imaginary fines. Your fingertips glide along the drying rack. The wood is warm in places, cool in others, depending on how the evening breeze has touched it. You check a saffron-infused bar next. Its warm golden tone like a sunrise that forgot to be loud. The scent is subtle, barely there, but unmistakable when you lean in. It reminds you of kitchens, of rice dishes simmering slowly, of merchants arguing cheerfully over spice prices in crowded markets. A mainstream historical fact flickers saffron, though costly, was commonly used in elite households of the empire for both culinary and medicinal purposes. Here, though, you've used only a whisper of it, just enough to scent the hands of someone washing up after a long day. You turn the bar over, examining its edges. No cracks, no odd streaking. The surface is evening out beautifully. You feel ridiculously proud, like a parent admiring a child who finally learned to say, please, instead of yelling. This nightly check is part science, part ritual, and part gossip session between you and the soaps. You set the bar down, resisting the urge to give it an encouraging pat. The breeze picks up, carrying the scent of warm dust, distant cooking fires, and something floral that might be jasmine or might be your imagination gently nudging you toward calm. You lean back on the wobbling stool. You tell yourself it's meditatively unstable, and let your eyes wander up toward the small square of sky. It's deepening now, transitioning from purple to navy. One star appears, faint but insistent. You think about how many soap makers across the empire are probably doing the same task right now, checking their drying racks before bed. It's a comforting thought. Thousands of little courtyards, thousands of small, quiet nightly routines like yours, invisible threads tying together people you'll never meet. You return to the shelves. The crowned cat mold from last night's batch catches your eye, its imprint drying nicely on the surface of a nearly cured bar. The cat looks slightly less judgmental today, as though it has come to terms with its destiny of cleansing someone's elbows. You let out a soft laugh, your third and final joke for this section. Maybe we should give this one to the apprentice. You murmur. It might raise his standards. A faint rustle interrupts your thoughts. A small gecko scurries across the top shelf, pauses, and stares at you with the unimpressed expression of a creature who believes everything in the world belongs to it. You nod respectfully. You've learned not to challenge the gecko union. Historically, people kept small reptiles around homes because they ate insects, though almost no one documented it because geckos doing their job wasn't compelling manuscript material. Still, this one acts like it deserves a salary. You finish your inspection slowly, savoring the pace. Each bar is a small triumph, an invisible collaboration between time, temperature, touch, and a little superstition. Some soap makers insist that bars cure better during certain phases of the moon. Historians still argue whether that was sincere belief or just an excuse for inconsistent batches. You personally suspect the latter, but you're willing to let the moon take credit anyway. It seems to enjoy the attention. You stretch your back, feeling the tension melt away. The courtyard hums with nighttime stillness. The soaps rest peacefully in their rows, and you know you've done enough for tonight. You rise, slow and deliberate, letting the soft scrape of the stool against the tiles blend into the background whisper of the breeze. The racks will hold until morning, they always do. And you, too, are ready to drift deeper into the quiet rhythms of the evening. You walk back through the courtyard, brushing your fingertips lightly along the grapevine as though thanking it for its service as tonight's official provider of ambience, and you slip into the adjoining storeroom where the olive oil casks wait in polite, rounded silence. The shift in atmosphere is immediate. The air grows thicker, cooler, carrying the buttery, almost fruity scent of pressed olives. It wraps around you like a warm quilt pretending to be a cold breeze, and you inhale deeply, feeling your shoulders drop the way they do when you finally remember to relax. The storeroom is small, narrow, low, ceilinged, built from stone that still holds a whisper of daytime heat, but it feels like the heart of your entire craft. Without the oil, nothing happens. No stirring, no thickening, no lavender, scented dreams for tomorrow's customers. And tonight, before bed, your task is to check the precious stash, the reserve supply you keep tucked away like a squirrel storing nuts, only more slippery and significantly more expensive. You push the wooden door fully open, and it emits a creak so dramatic you half expect it to announce its own entrance. A mainstream historical fact crosses your mind as you step inside the Ottomans' prized high-quality olive oil not just for cooking in lamps, but for soaps that lasted longer and cured more evenly. A good soap maker could tell the origin of an oil by its scent alone. Whether it came from the groves near Edremit, the coastal presses of the Aegean, or the quieter inland farms guarded by mountains like sleepy giants. You, being the modern softy that you are, can barely tell the difference between olive oil and fancy olive oil, but you pretend anyway, because leaning into the role is part of the charm. The casks sit in 3 rows, rounded bellies catching the lantern light like golden halos. You move to the first one, placing your palm against the cool wood. It's smooth, worn from years of handling. Each maker, before you leaving faint oils from their own work, calloused hands. You like to imagine they're cheering you on, though more likely they're thinking, "Don't spill anything, we worked too hard for that." You lift the wooden lid just enough to peer inside. The surface glints, a quiet, glassy sheen. There's something soothing about the stillness of olive oil resting untouched. In your previous life, oil was something that sloshed aggressively in plastic bottles when you grabbed it off the grocery shelf. Here it waits, it listens. It has opinions about weather patterns for reasons known only to itself. A quirky tidbit floats up, something a merchant told you weeks ago, though he claimed it with such confidence you suspect it might be half. Mythsome traders would taste a drop of olive oil to determine not just its age and press method, but the temperament of the grove, happy trees. He insisted, make forgiving oil. Whether he meant sunlight conditions or tree psychology remains unclear, and historians still argue whether such tasting traditions were genuine techniques or elaborate sales theatrics. You decide not to taste tonight, partly because you don't trust the questionable spoon on the shelf, and partly because you've already had enough surprises for one lifetime. Instead, you check the second cask. This one is heavier, fuller, its wooden frame reinforced with iron bands that have been hammered into place by a blacksmith who clearly believed in overachieving. You lift it slightly by the rim, only a centimeter or two, to judge its weight. It responds with a tiny slosh, almost a sigh. You whisper, "Same, because you too would like to sigh dramatically if someone lifted you unexpectedly. That's your first joke of the section, and frankly, the cask deserves it. You take the small dipper off its hook, a simple wooden ladle worn smooth as a river stone, and ease it into the cask. It breaks the surface with a soft glup, sending ripples outward, catching the lantern glow in concentric circles that look suspiciously like the beginnings of soap bubble art. When you raise the dipper, the oil falls back in a quiet ribbon, slow and decadent. Perfect. Not too cloudy. Not too thick. Not harboring the secret desire to become salad dressing. You set the dipper aside and check the final cask, a smaller one, tucked in the shadowed corner. This is your emergency stash, the one you only open when a rush of orders arrives or when the apprentice accidentally knocks an entire mold tray onto the floor, which has happened exactly twice. You appreciate the little barrel's restraint, its determination to remain unbothered by the chaos of the workshop. It feels like the introvert of the group. You crouch, placing both hands on either side of the cask, your fingers brushing over dust and tiny nicks in the grain. You lift the lid. Inside, the oil glows dark gold and aged, patient color. You make a mental note to top this one up tomorrow, but it's holding well for now. As you lean closer, a faint scent drifts upward, deeper, earthier, almost like herbs dried too long in the sun. Another mainstream detail surfaces. Some regions would store olive oil in clay amphorae instead of wooden casks, believing the clay preserved coolness better. Whether that's actually true or simply regional pride disguised as science, historians still argue. Naturally, you run your finger lightly along the rim of the barrel, feeling the tiny imperfections in the wood. It grounds you, this simple act. The storeroom carries the muffled quiet of a place that knows it's important but doesn't brag about it. The walls absorb the lantern's glow, darkening the corners until they feel like the gentle edges of a dream. A soft rustling sound draws your attention. You turn, half expecting the apprentice, but instead you spot a mouse near a sack of dried herbs, staring at you with a look that suggests you've interrupted its evening grocery shopping. It freezes. You freeze. The two of you exchange the kind of silent negotiation that transcends language. After a moment, the mouse decides you aren't a threat. Your whole vibe screams, "Tired artisan," and disappears behind a jar, leaving you to whisper your second joke. At least someone around here is eating well. You return to the casks and close each lid carefully, tapping them twice the way your mentor taught you. Is it necessary? Absolutely not. Does it make you feel competent? Absolutely yes. You hook the dipper back onto its nail and wipe your palms on your apron. As you step out of the storeroom, you pause in the doorway, letting the transition from cool, scented darkness to soft courtyard air refresh your senses. The soaps rest where you left them. The grapevine rustles lazily. The gecko, now sprawled on the wall like a tired king, eyes you once and decides you are beneath notice. Fair. You slide the storeroom door closed behind you, whispering, "Sleep well," as if the casks can hear you. Maybe they can. Maybe everything here listens. Wood, stone, vines, even the cooling bars of soap. Maybe that's part of what makes these quiet Ottoman nights feel so alive. And as you step back toward the workshop, you let your final joke slip free. If I ever reincarnate, I want to come back as a cask. Zero responsibilities. Maximum vibes. The night deepens around you, warm and steady. Your tasks complete, you feel the peaceful hum of routine settle into your bones as you drift into the next moment of your evening. You wander back toward the center of the courtyard, allowing the gentle warmth radiating from the workshop walls to wrap around your shoulders. Lanterns sway lightly in the breeze, casting flickering shadows over the cobblestones, and you take a moment to appreciate how the courtyard seems to have contracted, inviting you to move slower, think softer, and observe the tiniest details without urgency. The night is deepening, but it's not silent. Instead, it hums in low tones, carrying the soft scrape of brooms, the occasional sigh of an apprentice stretching after a long day, and the subtle rhythm of distant animals settling down. Every sound feels deliberate, like a part of a composition designed specifically for calm. A mainstream historical fact comes to mind as you pause beside a small stone fountain, its shallow basin catching the lantern light. Ottoman courtyards often incorporated fountains not just for aesthetic appeal, but to maintain humidity in hot, dry weather. The gentle splashing and trickling of water also doubled as a soundscape that encouraged relaxation and contemplative thought, essentially an ancient form of white noise. You lean over the basin and dip your fingertips into the water. It's pleasantly cool, a quiet contrast to the lingering warmth of the oil and the sun-baked stones. Your eyes wander to a pair of low benches lining one side of the courtyard. One apprentice is seated there, polishing wooden molds with meticulous care. The other stands, balancing on one leg as they reach for a higher shelf, trying not to disturb the stillness of the evening. They move in harmony with the ambient rhythm of the night, each action deliberate and unhurried. You notice small, charming quirks. The apprentice polishing the molds hums a melody you can't place, a tune that seems to rise and fall in sync with the flickering lanterns, while the one balancing on the bench occasionally pauses to glance at a mold. tilting it just slightly as if adjusting its angle to receive the best moonlight. Historians still debate whether these subtle rituals, humming, checking angles, and adjusting light, had practical purposes or were purely meditative habits developed over generations. A cat slips silently across the courtyard, tail straight and proud. It pauses near the fountain, dipping a paw in the water before sauntering along the edge of a rack of drying soaps. You recall that Sabun, your recurring feline observer, has a habit of testing everything for quality control. Though whether she's genuinely discerning or simply enjoys batting at soap is up for debate. You allow yourself a quiet smile, imagining her delivering a verdict to the master with a flick of her tail. The apprentice polishing molds gestures toward a set of molds with delicate carved patterns. You lean in to examine them, noticing intricate floral motifs intertwined with geometric knots. Some bear faint traces of pigment from previous batches, hinting at the care and attention each soap receives during its creation. You wonder if the artisans who originally carved these molds imagined the bars would still be inspected centuries later, with their patterns catching the lantern light in gentle waves. A quirky tidbit comes to mind: some Ottoman soap makers occasionally embedded tiny objects, a coin, a dried flower petal, or a carved symbol, into the soap as a good luck charm or subtle signature. Many of these embedded surprises have long since dissolved or been forgotten, leaving only the smooth, fragrant surfaces we see today. You step over to the drying racks again, checking the bars you placed there earlier. The surfaces have firmed just slightly more since your last inspection, and the scents have mellowed into something even softer: a quiet whisper of lavender, the muted warmth of olive oil, and the faint floral undercurrent of rose petals. You run a finger along one edge, noting the gentle curve left by the mold. Even this small act feels soothing, like a handshake with history, or a silent agreement that you are allowed to rest now. The master approaches from the workshop doorway, his shadow stretching long across the courtyard. He carries a small cloth in one hand, wiping the rim of a lantern with deliberate care. You notice the soft, deliberate movements, the way he rolls the cloth, checks the flame, and ensures the wick is trimmed just so. A mainstream fact sneaks into your awareness. Guild standards often required meticulous maintenance of lanterns to ensure consistent lighting for evening tasks, yet this requirement also had the incidental benefit of creating a tranquil, controlled environment. Whether intended for meditation or practical efficiency, the effect is undeniable. You take a slow, deep breath and let your gaze wander to the lanterns swaying gently above. The flickering light dances across stone, wood, and soap, drawing subtle, playful patterns that seem to nudge you toward stillness. You realize you're beginning to sync with this quiet tempo. The slow rotations of water in the fountain, the rhythmic brushing of the apprentice's hands, and the steady heartbeat of the courtyard itself. You almost imagine that every object here, from the barrels of olive oil to the drying bars of soap, participates in a nocturnal orchestra, each performing its tiny, essential movement for the benefit of the whole. Another quirky tidbit drifts into your awareness. Some artisans believed that speaking softly to the soaps while they dried encouraged them to cure evenly, almost as if the bars themselves were receptive to gentle conversation. You lower your voice in imitation, murmuring encouragements to the rows of lavender and rose-scented bars. The courtyard remains indifferent, but you take comfort in performing the ritual, however whimsical, feeling connected to generations of soap makers who likely whispered similar words centuries ago. The breeze picks up again, moving through the grapevine and across the lantern-lit courtyard, carrying scents and sounds into subtle, overlapping layers. You lean against a nearby wall, arms crossed loosely, feeling the satisfaction of the day's work settle in. Every piece of soap, every cask, every carefully stacked mold contributes to a rhythm that has persisted for decades, centuries even. And in that rhythm, you find a soothing constancy, a quiet meditation that has nothing to do with productivity and everything to do with simply existing in a space that rewards care, attention, and patience. You pause for one last glance at the drying racks. The bars sit in quiet alignment, glowing faintly in the lantern light, scented but patient, firm but yielding. And as you breathe in, feeling the soft hum of the courtyard wrap around you, you recognize the comfort in this order, in this gentle progression from day to night, from work to rest. This is what it means to exist in the slow, deliberate tempo of an Ottoman soap maker's evening. You leave the courtyard for the narrow stone hallway that leads to the master's private quarters, a place usually reserved for inventory checks and quiet administrative tasks, and you notice how the temperature drops slightly as the night settles. The walls here are thick, retaining the day's warmth but offering a gentle contrast that feels like a reminder to slow down even further. Lanterns hang at intervals, their light softened by smoked glass, casting elongated, dreamy shadows that creep across the floor like sleepy cats. You step carefully, your sandals brushing against the uneven tiles, and realize how the building itself seems to guide your pace, insisting on unhurried movement. Inside the small office, you see stacks of parchment and ledgers, each meticulously recorded with batches, ingredients, and customer notes. The master gestures toward them, indicating that part of tonight's task is a review of the day's work. You slide onto a low stool, running your fingers lightly across the edges of the parchments. A mainstream historical fact comes to mind: Ottoman guilds maintained rigorous records not just for taxation, but to ensure consistency and quality across generations. Accuracy was a form of respect for the craft, for customers, and for the continuity of tradition. You admire the neatness, even though your own handwriting back home is usually an abstract form of chaos. An apprentice brings a small candle to illuminate the ledgers. Its flame dances lazily, reflecting on the inked letters. You lean in, noticing tiny annotations in the margins, shorthand reminders, symbols for specific olive oil qualities, and small sketches of flowers or stars. You realize these notes are a kind of personal touch, a whisper from one artisan to the next, embedded quietly into the fabric of daily work. Historians still argue whether these marginalia were primarily functional, or if they also served as an artistic outlet for a guild that valued beauty in all forms. Either way, it feels intimate and oddly comforting to be reading them under soft candlelight. You glance over the entries for today's batches. Lavender-infused soaps, rose-scented varieties, saffron-tinted bars, all accounted for meticulously. One small annotation catches your eye, a note about the crowned cat mold, marked with a tiny smiley face drawn in ink. You chuckle softly, recognizing the apprentice's signature whimsy. Even in a world dedicated to precision, there's room for subtle humor. You tap the ledger gently with your finger, as if to give the note a quiet nod of approval. The master leans back in his chair, hands folded, eyes closing briefly. You take the cue and exhale slowly, letting the quiet hum of the building settle into your bones. A faint wind drifts through the open window, carrying scents from the courtyard: olive oil, damp stone, and the faint whisper of crushed lavender petals. You imagine how these aromas have been inhaled by countless artisans over the centuries, creating a subtle, shared sensory memory. A quirky tidbit floats into your mind: some soap makers would burn tiny bundles of herbs in the office to bless the records, believing that aromatic smoke encouraged accuracy and warded off minor errors. You notice a small, half-burned bundle of sage in the corner. Whether it genuinely improves record keeping is unclear, but it adds a layer of ritualistic calm to the room. You consider lighting it, but decide that tonight, the candlelight alone is sufficient. You move on to inspect the small stockpile of materials stored on low shelves. Olive oil jars gleam faintly in the candlelight, dried lavender and rose petals are bundled carefully in cloth sacks, and small clay bowls hold precisely measured amounts of lye. Everything is organized with a quiet discipline, yet there's a softness in the arrangement, a sense that someone has intentionally made the workspace welcoming. You trace your fingers along the edges of a clay bowl, feeling the texture of smooth, cooled ceramic beneath your fingertips. The contrast between hard surfaces and soft scents feels grounding. The apprentice beside you begins to sort a small pile of soap samples from the past week, arranging them by scent and curing stage. You notice the delicate touch with which they handle the bars, as though the soaps are fragile friends rather than inanimate objects. You smile, remembering that in some workshops, soap makers were said to speak quietly to their creations during this process. Not out of necessity, but because gentle attention was believed to encourage a better finish. Historians still debate whether this practice was widespread or merely a charming anecdote preserved in oral histories, yet standing here, it feels entirely natural. You take a moment to appreciate the quiet rhythm of this space. The candle flickers, the apprentice hums softly while working, and the master sits in contemplative silence. It's a scene that has likely repeated countless times across centuries, every element contributing to the slow, deliberate cadence of an evening well spent. You feel connected to the continuity of craft and care, aware that the patience and precision invested here will ripple outward in the form of fragrant, enduring bars of soap. You lean back in your stool, closing your eyes briefly. The candle's glow flickers across your closed eyelids, casting shifting patterns that feel like tiny constellations mapping the workflow of centuries past. Outside, the night air rustles the grapevine, whispers across the courtyard, and brings with it the faint hum of the city settling into sleep. You breathe in deeply, letting your body sync with this rhythm, your mind untangling from the hurried motions of the day. Finally, you rise, stretching slowly and deliberately. You arrange the ledgers neatly, ensuring nothing will topple in the quiet hours ahead. You glance one last time at the candle, allowing its soft light to linger on your vision before stepping back into the courtyard. The night has deepened further, stars dotting the sky in patient constellations, and you feel the satisfaction of a day completed with intention and care. The workshop, the storeroom, the drying racks, they all rest peacefully, waiting for the next day's rhythm to resume. You step out of the office into the courtyard once more, letting the evening breeze brush your cheeks and tussle your hair in gentle waves. The grapevine along the wall shivers softly as if acknowledging your return, and you take a slow, deliberate breath of the night air, carrying the scents of olive oil, lavender, and the faint sweetness of drying rose petals. Everything feels hushed yet alive, each sound subtle: a distant dog's yawn, a soft scrape of sandals against the stone floor, the muted rustle of leaves overhead. The courtyard has become a sanctuary, a quiet world apart from the bustle of markets, streets, and everyday life. You move toward the drying racks again, curious to see how the bars you inspected earlier have settled overnight. Their surfaces are firmer, yet still yield softly to a gentle touch. Lavender bars exude a delicate floral whisper, rose-scented ones glow faintly in the lantern light, and the saffron-tinged pieces shimmer like captured sunlight. You lift a bar carefully, feeling its weight and texture, and imagine the hands that will use it tomorrow, the fingers of a merchant, a baker, a young child dipping into water for the first time. In the Ottoman Empire, soap was a personal, intimate commodity, and each bar carried the imprint of the maker's care. Historians still debate whether the meticulous drying processes were meant to preserve fragrance or to enforce guild standards, but standing here, you feel both purposes woven seamlessly into the evening's calm. A small, deliberate rustling draws your attention. Sabin, the feline overseer of quality control, emerges from the shadows, tail upright, paws soundless on the stone floor. She pauses by the drying racks, sniffing a bar with what can only be described as regal scrutiny. Her whiskers twitch. You nod respectfully. If she approves, you reason, then the batch is indeed ready. A quirky tidbit drifts into your mind. Some soap makers believed cats absorbed negative energy from the oils, leaving the bars spiritually purified. Whether true or superstition, the symbolism adds a layer of whimsy to the ritual. You step carefully around the racks, checking the spacing between each bar. Airflow is crucial for even curing. The master once reminded you, an uneven placement could result in subtle differences in texture or fragrance. You imagine each bar as a tiny student in an ancient classroom, learning to stand straight, keep calm, and develop character over time. The scented air seems to swirl with these invisible lessons, soft and patient, urging you to match its tempo. Nearby, an apprentice kneels on the stone floor, arranging the most delicate bars, rose-scented, on the lower shelves. Their fingers move with precision and care, occasionally brushing dust from the wooden slats. You notice small flourishes, a tiny spiral pressed into the edge of a soap, a faint indent meant only for the maker to recognize. Historians still argue whether such marks were practical for identification or served purely as personal signatures, but to you, they feel like whispers from centuries past, tiny imprints of humanity. The lanterns flicker, their light soft and golden, casting gentle shadows that stretch across the courtyard like elongated dancers. You pause and notice the interplay between light and object. The drying bars glow faintly from within, the grapevine's leaves shimmer, and the stones beneath your feet seem almost to pulse in response to your slow movements. It is a subtle, almost imperceptible dance of night, light, and craftsmanship, and you feel yourself falling into its rhythm. You take a bar of lavender soap from the middle shelf, inhaling its calming scent. The aroma is soft, subtle, almost hypnotic, and you imagine how centuries of artisans have spent nights performing similar gestures, repeating the same motions for the sake of care, precision, and quiet beauty. A mainstream historical fact surfaces: Ottoman soap makers often categorize bars by scent and color, storing them in specific patterns to maintain consistency for customers who expected the same quality each time. This attention to detail transforms a simple product into an enduring craft, one that is passed from generation to generation, quietly shaping domestic life across the empire. Your fingers trail along the edges of the other bars, noting the slight variations in hue, texture, and firmness. Each piece carries its own story, molded by oil quality, ingredient ratios, and environmental factors. You feel an odd intimacy with these inanimate objects, as though you are conversing with them through touch and observation alone. You whisper a light-hearted comment to yourself. Well, at least none of you complain about long shifts or unpaid overtime. The courtyard seems to absorb your humor without judgment, only encouraging stillness. The breeze lifts again, carrying faint scents of the surrounding neighborhood, distant cooking fires, smoldering herbs, and the occasional whiff of baking bread. You imagine the life beyond these walls, the markets bustling earlier in the day, merchants unloading goods, the faint clatter of horse hooves on cobblestone streets. And yet here, time moves differently. The courtyard, the soaps, the lanterns, and even the cat all follow their own quiet rhythm, inviting you to do the same. You straighten, brushing imaginary dust from your hands, and take a last, lingering glance at the racks. Each bar rests in quiet perfection, a testament to hours of careful work, gentle rituals, and centuries of accumulated knowledge. The courtyard hums softly with night's energy, and you feel the satisfaction of having participated in this timeless cadence. With a final breath, you step toward the workshop door, knowing that the night's work is complete, the soaps rest peacefully, and the quiet rhythm of this ancient craft will continue tomorrow. You return to the workshop, the soft scrape of your sandals against the stone floor echoing faintly as you move through the open doorway. The warm glow of the lanterns inside bathes the room in a comforting amber light, reflecting off wooden shelves, clay bowls, and the smooth surfaces of soap molds. The smell is richer here, olive oil mingling with lavender, rose, and a whisper of saffron, creating a layered scent that feels almost edible, yet remains soothingly subtle. You pause in the doorway for a moment, letting the atmosphere wash over you, and you realize that this workshop is more than a workplace. It is a sanctuary, a vessel for the gentle rhythms of an Ottoman night. Across the room, the apprentice is tidying the workbench, stacking molds, and gently wiping traces of lye from the wooden surfaces. Their movements are careful, deliberate, almost meditative. You notice the soft creak of wood under their fingers, the faint glint of residual oil on the edge of a bowl, and the satisfying clink when two molds touch. A mainstream historical fact emerges in your mind. Ottoman soap workshops emphasize not just the crafting of soap, but the maintenance of a clean, orderly environment, believing that care for one's tools directly influenced the quality of the finished product. You smile at the thought of generations of artisans quietly agreeing that tidiness and patience are inseparable. You walk over to a low shelf where partially cured soaps are stacked in neat rows. Each bar is subtly different: a pale lavender, a soft rose, a warm saffron gold. You pick up a lavender bar, rolling it gently between your palms. The surface is firm but pliable, exuding the faint, calming fragrance that will be released fully only after it cures completely. You recall a quirky tidbit. Some makers in the past would intentionally press tiny symbols into the soap, such as stars, crescents, or even miniature animals, to imbue the bars with character or convey a hidden message. Historians still debate whether these imprints were practical for identification or purely decorative, but seeing the bars now, you appreciate the artistry regardless of intention. You step to the bench where the mortar and pestle from earlier rests, a thin residue of lavender clinging stubbornly to its surfaces. You pause, running your thumb lightly along the curve of the mortar. It's worn smooth from decades of use, a tactile record of countless hands that have guided petals into fragrant powders. You imagine the conversations, jokes, and quiet sighs that have passed through this room over generations, and you feel connected to an unbroken chain of craft that stretches far beyond your own presence. The master approaches quietly, holding a small bundle of dried herbs. He places it near the hearth, intending to burn it lightly for fragrance and perhaps superstition. The smoke curls lazily upward, mingling with the lingering sense of soap and oil, carrying a delicate warmth into the corners of the room. A mainstream fact enters your awareness. Burning herbs such as sage or rosemary was a common practice to freshen workshops and believed to bring good luck. Whether the scent influenced the curing process or merely soothed the maker's nerves, the effect is undeniably calming. You watch as the apprentice hums softly while organizing the soap molds. Their gentle song merges with the curling smoke, the faint glug of leftover oil settling in jars, and the occasional creak of wooden beams overhead. It feels almost orchestral, a subtle symphony composed for focus, patience, and comfort. You think about how long these nightly rituals have been repeated, century after century, maintaining consistency and care without urgency or fanfare. A faint rustle at the far corner catches your attention. A small mouse scurries across the floor, pausing to sniff the air before disappearing under a shelf. You chuckle softly, remembering the first night you noticed its curiosity. A quirky tidbit floats to mind. Some soap makers considered mice a good omen in workshops, as long as they didn't chew anything essential. Whether true or superstition, you appreciate the small presence, adding life to an otherwise still space. You move toward the lye container, checking that the remaining amount is adequate for tomorrow's first batch. Its surface is calm, smooth, reflecting the lantern glow. You dip a wooden stirrer lightly into it, not to use, but to gauge viscosity and ensure it has not thickened unevenly. The lye responds slowly, a measured ribbon descending back into the container, almost like it's acknowledging your attention. Historians still debate whether Ottoman artisans actively monitored every container or whether most batches were left largely to intuition. Yet your evening here demonstrates a careful balance of both practice and instinct. With everything in order, you straighten, taking a slow, deliberate breath. The room is quiet except for subtle movements. The apprentice humming, the herbs curling in smoke, and the faint ambient sound of distant night life drifting through a small window. You glance at the drying racks once more, satisfied that the soaps are stable and resting well. This moment of completion, simple and understated, brings a sense of calm deep into your chest. Finally, you step toward the doorway again, pausing to let the lantern glow illuminate the room one last time. Every surface, every scent, every subtle movement holds a soft testament to care, patience, and the quiet beauty of an Ottoman evening. You feel the satisfaction of having participated in the rhythm, knowing the night will continue undisturbed, allowing the workshop to breathe, the soaps to cure, and the artisans to rest in gentle readiness for tomorrow. You step back into the courtyard, letting the cool night air wrap around your shoulders, carrying with it the faint rustle of the grapevine leaves and the soft hum of distant life beyond the workshop walls. The lanterns flicker gently, casting elongated, golden shadows across the stone floor, each movement measured and calm. You take a slow, deliberate breath, letting the scents of olive oil, lavender, and rose mingle in the quiet space, settling into the familiar rhythm of an Ottoman evening. Everything here feels intentional, a gentle choreography of sound, scent, and shadow. You move toward the drying racks, your footsteps muted on the cobblestones. The bars of soap you inspected earlier are now slightly firmer, their surfaces settling into a smooth, almost meditative consistency. Lavender bars exude a subtle floral aroma, rose, scented ones glow faintly in the lantern light, and saffron-tinged pieces shimmer with warmth. You pick up a lavender bar, rolling it gently between your palms. It feels surprisingly weighty, a testament to the careful curing process. A mainstream historical fact surfaces: Ottoman soap makers often sorted their products by scent, color, and intended use, ensuring that each household received exactly what they expected. Consistency was as important as fragrance, a promise embedded in every bar. A small rustle near the fountain draws your attention. Sabin, the workshop cat, glides gracefully across the courtyard, pausing to inspect the bars of soap with what can only be described as feline judgment. You smile, remembering the whimsical notion that cats were once believed to absorb negative energy from soap, keeping the bars spiritually pure. Whether superstition or tradition, Sabin's presence brings an oddly comforting rhythm to the courtyard, a living counterpoint to the carefully arranged inanimate objects. You step over to the fountain, its shallow basin catching the lantern light in soft ripples. The water is cool and still, reflecting the stars beginning to pierce the deepening night sky. You dip a fingertip into the water, letting the gentle splash mingle with the ambient sounds: a distant dog's yawn, the faint scrape of a broom, and the subtle flutter of leaves overhead. This courtyard, so small and enclosed, becomes an entire universe of slow, deliberate movements. Historians still debate whether such courtyards were designed primarily for practical purposes, air circulation, humidity, or privacy, or if their calming ambience was intentionally cultivated, but tonight, the effect is undeniable. You return to the drying racks, checking the spacing between each bar. Airflow is crucial for even curing, ensuring that the texture remains smooth and the fragrance uniform. You arrange a few rows, scented bars slightly further apart, watching the faint shadows stretch across their surfaces. It occurs to you that these bars, simple as they may seem, are embodiments of patience and care, every fold of lye, every pressed petal, and every gentle stir contributing to the final product. A quirky tidbit comes to mind: some soap makers in the past would press tiny motifs or symbols into bars to convey secret messages or wishes to the future user. Historians still argue whether these marks were functional, decorative, or purely whimsical, yet the idea adds a layer of intimacy to the craft. You pause near the saffron-tinted soaps, inhaling their subtle warmth. The color is delicate, almost imperceptible in the lantern light, yet it feels like a miniature sunrise captured in wax and fragrance. You run your fingers along the edges, noting the slight variations in hue and texture. Each bar tells a story, molded by oil quality, ingredient ratios, and the subtle influence of temperature and humidity. You feel an odd connection to these inanimate creations, as though they carry the echoes of hands that worked before yours and will continue to do so long after you. A gentle breeze lifts, rustling the grapevine and sending a faint scattering of petals across the courtyard. You watch them drift slowly to the ground, landing near the base of a drying rack. It's almost hypnotic, the way these tiny elements interact with your environment: air, light, and fragrance moving in harmony. You realize that every night here is a quiet meditation, each motion deliberate, each observation a small act of mindfulness. You straighten, brushing imaginary dust from your hands, and take a final, lingering look at the drying racks. The bars sit in quiet alignment, radiant under lantern light, their scents mingling into a symphony of subtle aromas. Everything is as it should be: the soaps, the courtyard, the lanterns, and even Saban, who has claimed a warm patch of stone near the fountain. You breathe in deeply, letting the rhythm of the evening, the scent, and the gentle light settle into your chest. As you move toward the workshop door, you take a moment to whisper a soft encouragement to the soaps, a nod to centuries of artisans who likely perform similar gestures. The night is calm, the courtyard alive with gentle energy, and you feel at peace, knowing the work is complete, the night is quiet, and the rhythm of the Ottoman craft will resume again tomorrow. You slip back into the workshop, the soft click of the door marking a gentle boundary between courtyard and interior. The lanterns inside glow warmly, bouncing off wooden shelves, clay bowls, and stacked molds, bathing the room in a golden haze that feels both protective and serene. The air carries the mingled scents of olive oil, lavender, rose, and the faintest trace of saffron, subtle, layered, and strangely comforting. You pause, taking a slow, intentional breath, letting the aroma seep into your senses, and you realize that this is the heart of your nightly rhythm: the workshop itself, alive with history and quiet care. The apprentice is kneeling by a low shelf, gently polishing molds that have been used throughout the day. Their movements are precise, deliberate, and almost ritualistic. You notice the slight creak of wood under their hands, the soft clink of molds touching, and the faint shimmer of oil residue on the surfaces. A mainstream historical fact surfaces: Ottoman soap makers meticulously maintained their tools, believing that care and attention directly influenced the quality of their soap. You smile at this, imagining centuries of artisans quietly agreeing that tidiness, patience, and attention to detail are inseparable. You step to a bench where remnants of yesterday's lavender batch still linger in a small mortar. Running your thumb lightly along its curve, you feel the smooth wear left by countless hands before you. There is something grounding about this tactile memory, a subtle connection to artisans long gone, yet still present in the textures and scents of the workshop. You lean closer, inhaling the faint lavender aroma, and you imagine the whispers, soft laughter, and gentle sighs that have filled this room over centuries. A small bundle of dried herbs rests near the hearth, ready to be burned to freshen the space. The master gently lights it, letting the curling smoke mingle with the fragrances of soap and oil. A mainstream fact comes to mind. Such rituals were common not only for pleasant aroma, but also as superstitions intended to protect the quality of soap. Whether the smoke had a tangible effect on curing or merely provided reassurance, its presence adds another layer of calm to the room. You glance across the workshop at the drying racks, noting the careful alignment of bars by scent and color. Lavender, rose, and saffron bars are arranged with deliberate spacing, ensuring airflow and consistent curing. Your fingers brush a few of the bars lightly, noting subtle differences in texture and firmness. Each bar seems to carry its own personality, the lavender calm and subdued, the rose delicate and cheerful, and the saffron warm and radiant. Historians still debate whether Ottoman soap makers intentionally anthropomorphized their creations, but tonight, standing among them, it feels entirely natural. A faint rustle draws your attention. Sabin, the workshop cat, pads silently across the floor, eyes fixed on a particularly fragrant rose-scented bar. You can't help but grin. This feline inspector adds both levity and presence to your work, a small companion in the quiet evening. A quirky tidbit comes to mind: some artisans believe that cats protected the soap from bad energy while curing, giving the animals an almost sacred role in the workshop. Whether true or superstition, you appreciate the gentle ceremony this belief imposes. You move toward the lye container, checking its consistency and level for tomorrow's first batch. The surface is smooth, reflecting lantern light in a quiet ribbon of gold. You dip a wooden stirrer briefly, testing its thickness, and let the ribbon of lye descend back into the container. It moves slowly, deliberately, almost as if acknowledging your care. Historians still argue whether Ottoman soap makers constantly monitored each batch or relied mostly on intuition, yet you recognize the combination of attention and experience in this nightly ritual. The apprentice hums softly while organizing molds, the faint melody blending with the curling smoke and the soft clinks of tools. You feel the rhythm of the room settling over you like a gentle tide. This space and these rituals have existed for centuries, providing structure, calm, and a sense of continuity across generations. You glance one last time at the drying racks. The bars are stable, their scents harmonizing into a soft, meditative symphony that fills the workshop with quiet presence. You take a slow, deep breath, feeling your body relax in response to the gentle, familiar environment. The night hums softly around you, anchored by the warmth of lanterns, the subtle curling smoke, and the reassuring solidity of wooden shelves and stone floors. Every object, every aroma, and every small motion participates in the quiet, deliberate cadence of an Ottoman soap maker's evening. And as you prepare to step back into the courtyard one last time tonight, you feel a sense of satisfaction and peace, knowing the night has been spent in careful attention, gentle care, and quiet beauty. You step back into the courtyard, the evening air brushing softly against your face and carrying the mingled scents of soap, olive oil, and night-blooming flora. Lanterns sway lightly in the breeze, casting playful shadows across the cobblestones and reflecting faintly off the drying bars of soap. You pause, letting the ambient sounds of rustling leaves, distant footsteps, and a soft night bird wash over you. This courtyard, small and enclosed, is alive with subtle movement, every element contributing to the gentle rhythm of your evening. Moving toward the drying racks, you note the subtle changes in the soap bars since your last inspection. Lavender bars are firming steadily, their fragrance soft and soothing, while rose-scented soaps exude a faintly sweet, floral warmth. The saffron-tinted bars glimmer in the lantern light, their golden hue catching your eye like a miniature sunrise captured in wax. You pick up a lavender bar, rolling it gently between your palms. It feels solid yet yielding, a perfect balance of texture and aroma. A mainstream historical fact floats to mind. Ottoman soap makers often meticulously monitored curing times to ensure bars would last longer and release fragrance evenly. A small movement at the base of a drying rack draws your attention. Sabin, the workshop cat, pads silently across the stones, tail held high, eyes gleaming in the lantern light. She pauses to inspect a particular lavender bar, sniffing it carefully before moving along. You smile quietly, recalling the whimsical belief that cats helped purify soap by absorbing negative energy. Historians still argue whether such beliefs were widely held or merely charming anecdotes passed through guild folklore, yet tonight, Sabin's silent inspection adds a layer of comfort and levity to your routine. You crouch slightly to adjust the spacing of a few rose-scented bars, ensuring adequate airflow for even curing. It feels meditative, almost like arranging a small garden of fragrances. Each bar is unique, subtle differences in texture, slight variations in hue, and delicate surface patterns. You notice a tiny petal pressed into one, a small flourish added by an apprentice during molding. A quirky tidbit surfaces some soap makers historically embedded small symbols or charms into bars, intended as personal signatures or good luck tokens for the end user. The effect is whimsical yet intimate, a hidden conversation between maker and recipient. Your gaze drifts upward to the grapevine climbing one corner of the courtyard, its leaves rustling softly in the breeze. You notice tiny buds just beginning to form, a quiet reminder that life continues beyond the daily rhythm of soap making. The interplay between nature and craft is subtle, but constant leaves flicker, light shifts, fragrances mingle, and the courtyard itself seems to breathe in harmony with your careful, deliberate movements. You move toward the fountain, kneeling slightly to let your fingertips graze the cool water. The ripples catch lantern reflections, sending shimmering patterns across the nearby walls and drying racks. You pause to watch the subtle dance, feeling the flow of time stretch and slow. Historically, fountains in Ottoman courtyards served multiple purposes: cooling, humidity control, and meditation. Whether makers appreciated them primarily for function or ambience, tonight the effect is entirely calming. You return to the racks, gently tapping a few bars to check their firmness. Each responds with a soft, quiet resilience, a tactile acknowledgement of time, care, and patience. The scent of lavender rises faintly, mingling with rose and saffron, creating a harmonious aroma that feels both soothing and grounding. You take a deep breath, letting the combined fragrances envelop your senses. As the night deepens, the courtyard feels suspended in a moment between work and rest. The lanterns flicker, the grapevine sways, Sabin observes quietly, and the soaps sit in their neat rows, glowing subtly in the golden light. You smile, appreciating the continuity of this ritual: centuries of artisans, generations of careful hands, all contributing to a rhythm that feels timeless. This quiet, deliberate practice is a meditation in itself, and you allow your thoughts to soften, your pace to slow, and your attention to rest fully in the gentle cadence of the Ottoman evening. You move along the edge of the courtyard, brushing your fingers lightly over the stone wall, feeling its cool, rough texture under your touch. The night air carries a faint fragrance of crushed lavender from the drying racks, blending seamlessly with the earthy aroma of olive oil lingering from the storeroom. Lanterns sway gently overhead, casting elongated shadows that ripple across the cobblestones. You take a slow breath, letting the layered scents and muted sounds settle into a rhythm, and you realize that these sensory details are as much a part of the Ottoman evening as the craft of soap itself. You pause near the storage bench where small clay bowls of herbs and petals rest, ready for tomorrow's mixing. Your hand hovers over the bowls, tracing the contours of the clay, noting the subtle variations in texture caused by generations of artisans shaping and smoothing them. A mainstream historical fact comes to mind: Ottoman soap makers carefully selected and stored herbs and fragrances to ensure consistency across batches, maintaining both quality and signature scents. It's remarkable how something as simple as a properly stored herb could influence the final product, reinforcing the careful deliberation embedded in every step of this craft. Sabin, the workshop cat, appears again, quietly padding along the stone floor. She pauses to sniff at a small pile of rose petals, tail flicking with interest. You recall the quirky tradition some artisans held: that cats in the workshop could help absorb negative energy from the soap, ensuring a harmonious curing process. Historians still debate whether this was widespread practice or an amusing anecdote passed down through guild lore. Regardless, the cat's calm presence brings an understated joy, a subtle punctuation to the night's quiet routine. You step closer to the drying racks, inspecting the bars once more. The lavender-scented soaps have firmed nicely, their surfaces now smooth with only the faintest ridges left from the molds. You run a finger lightly along the edge of a rose-scented bar, feeling its gentle resilience. Each bar holds a small story of its creation: the careful pouring, the precise stirring, the deliberate pressing into molds. Even the smallest imperfections speak of hands that move deliberately, with care and attention to detail. A breeze drifts through the courtyard, rustling the grapevine leaves above and scattering a few petals onto the cobblestones. You watch them tumble slowly, drifting across the ground in a gentle ballet. A mainstream fact floats into your thoughts: grapevines in Ottoman courtyards were often used not only for aesthetic purposes but also for shade and humidity regulation, subtly enhancing the environment for both humans and soaps alike. The courtyard itself is a participant in the process, shaping fragrance, texture, and atmosphere in ways that might go unnoticed by casual visitors. You crouch slightly to adjust a few bars, ensuring proper spacing for airflow. The saffron-tinted soaps glimmer faintly under the lantern light, warm and rich in tone. You remember a quirky tidbit: some soap makers historically embedded tiny symbols or charms into bars as personal signatures or tokens of good fortune. Whether functional or decorative, The idea adds an intimate dimension to an otherwise methodical process. You lightly tap one of the bars with your fingertip, imagining the artisan who placed it there centuries ago, smiling quietly in shared ritual. The lanterns flicker softly, their light casting dancing shadows across the courtyard and the walls of the workshop. You take a slow, deep breath, letting the fragrance and the gentle hum of the evening envelop you. Each movement, from adjusting a bar to inhaling the scent of herbs, feels deliberate, slow, and unhurried. Historians still argue whether these nightly routines were primarily practical or meditative, but tonight it feels both. A quiet meditation wrapped in careful, meaningful work. You step back to observe the courtyard as a whole, the lanterns, the drying racks, the grapevine, the fountain, and Sabin resting quietly nearby. Everything fits into a slow, harmonious rhythm. The fragrances, textures, and subtle sounds combine into a symphony of calm that has persisted for generations. You allow yourself to sink into this moment, appreciating the continuity, the care, and the serene beauty of an Ottoman night dedicated to craft, routine, and gentle presence. You wander back toward the workshop doorway, letting your fingers trail lightly along the stone wall, feeling its cool, rough surface beneath your touch. The courtyard hums softly in the background. The rustle of grapevine leaves, the faint trickle of the fountain, and the distant calls of nocturnal birds blending into a gentle, almost hypnotic cadence. Lanterns swing slowly above, casting warm, flickering light across the drying racks and the cobblestones. Everything here seems suspended between night and ritual, each detail deliberately guiding your pace toward quiet reflection. Approaching the drying racks once more, you take stock of the soaps. Lavender bars are fully settled, their fragrance soft and delicate, a soothing whisper rather than a bold statement. Rose-scented bars glow faintly, their aroma faintly sweet, like a memory of a garden at dawn. The saffron-tinged pieces shimmer with understated warmth, golden reflections catching your eye. You pick up a lavender bar, rolling it gently in your palms, noting its firmness and subtle elasticity. A mainstream historical fact surfaces: Ottoman soap makers often monitored curing over several days to achieve optimal hardness, scent retention, and longevity, ensuring that each batch met precise standards. A small movement draws your attention. Sabin, ever vigilant, has emerged from the shadows. She pads gracefully toward a low shelf, her tail flicking rhythmically, pausing to sniff at a faintly scented lavender bar. You chuckle softly, remembering the whimsical belief that cats could absorb negative energy from soaps. Historians still debate the widespread significance of this practice, but tonight it adds a playful, comforting layer to the evening's ritual. You watch as she elegantly moves away, leaving only a faint paw print on the stone, a subtle signature in the quiet night. You crouch to adjust a few bars, ensuring even spacing and proper airflow. Each movement is deliberate, performed slowly and intentionally. Your fingertips trace faint ridges left by the molds, and you consider the care required to maintain such consistency across generations. A quirky tidbit floats into your mind: some artisans would press hidden symbols into the soap, personal tokens or messages for the user. Whether these were practical, decorative, or simply playful, it adds a layer of intimacy to the otherwise methodical craft. You tap one gently and whisper a soft joke. Consider this your secret, soap friend. The breeze picks up slightly, rustling the grapevine leaves above and scattering a few petals across the cobblestones. You pause to watch the delicate descent, each petal landing in a slow, deliberate pattern. The interplay of wind, light, and texture reminds you of how carefully these courtyards were designed. Mainstream historical sources note that Ottoman courtyards often incorporated elements like fountains, plants, and stone layouts to enhance airflow, humidity, and meditative ambience. Whether intentional for craft, aesthetics, or comfort, the effect is quietly profound. You turn your attention back to the fountain, kneeling slightly to let your fingers skim the cool water. The surface ripples softly, catching the flickering lantern reflections. You breathe in deeply, savoring the layered fragrances: olive oil, lavender, rose, and faint herbal undertones from the dried sage smoldering nearby. The courtyard, the soaps, and even Sabin seem to move in a subtle, shared rhythm, each element contributing to the gentle, meditative pulse of the night. A soft scrape from the workshop draws your attention. The apprentice is tidying molds near the far corner, hands moving with practiced care. You note the slight humming accompanying their actions, blending seamlessly with the ambient sounds of water, lanterns, and leaves. Historians still argue whether humming and small repetitive actions were purely meditative or also improved focus and precision, yet it seems clear that such habits contribute to the serene cadence of evening work. You step back, taking a final glance at the courtyard. The lanterns cast warm, golden light across the stone. The grapevine rustles softly above, Sabin curls near the fountain, and the soaps sit in perfect alignment. Everything breathes quietly together, in harmony with the rhythms of centuries of artisans who performed these same motions night after night. You inhale once more, feeling the peace and continuity of this place, and allow yourself to sink fully into the gentle cadence of the Ottoman evening, knowing the night is complete, the soaps are resting, and the ritual will continue with patience and care tomorrow. You move toward the far end of the courtyard, where the low stone wall meets the workshop annex, feeling the rough texture of the stones beneath your fingertips. The night air is cooler here, carrying faintly the scent of olive oil, lavender, and rose from the drying racks. Lanterns hang overhead, swaying ever so slightly, and their light reflects off the soap bars in soft, warm hues. The courtyard seems suspended in a quiet bubble, a space outside of time where every sound, scent, and motion encourages stillness. Pausing by a drying rack, you inspect the bars more closely. Lavender soaps are now fully firmed, their faint fragrance inviting calm and reflection. Rose-scented bars exude a subtle sweetness, warm yet delicate, while saffron-tinted bars glow with understated golden tones, catching the lantern light like tiny treasures. You pick up a lavender bar, rolling it gently between your palms, noting the tactile feedback, the smooth surface, slight give, and firmness that signifies successful curing. A mainstream historical fact comes to mind. Ottoman soap makers use curing to perfect texture and scent, often taking several days to achieve optimal results, balancing time and environment precisely. Sabin, ever vigilant, emerges silently from the shadows, gliding across the courtyard. Her tail curls high as she pauses to inspect a rose-scented bar, whiskers twitching. You smile softly, remembering the whimsical notion that cats absorbed negative energy from the soaps. Historians still debate whether this practice was a widespread belief or a charming anecdote preserved in guild lore. Regardless, Sabin's calm presence brings a comforting sense of life and continuity to the courtyard. You crouch to adjust a few bars for airflow, moving slowly, deliberately. Each soap has its own story, the precise pouring, the gentle stirring, the careful pressing into molds. You notice the faint imprint of an apprentice's tiny spiral signature on a lavender bar. A quirky tidbit drifts into your mind. Some soap makers embedded symbols or miniature motifs in bars, intended as secret messages, good luck charms, or simply playful flourishes. Whether practical or whimsical, they add personality to the craft and deepen your connection to the centuries of artisans who worked before you. The fountain ripples gently in the corner, catching the lantern light in soft patterns on the stones. You dip a fingertip into the water, letting it splash lightly. The courtyard's ambience is layered soft ripples of water, rustling leaves overhead, distant nocturnal sounds, and the faint hum of the apprentice's quiet movements. You consider that these sensory elements were intentionally cultivated. Mainstream sources suggest Ottoman courtyards often incorporated plants, water features, and lantern arrangements to enhance focus, calm, and humidity for both humans and soap. A gentle breeze lifts, brushing the grapevine leaves and scattering petals across the cobblestones. You watch them drift slowly, landing near the drying racks. The combination of wind, fragrance, and soft light creates a subtle meditation, a rhythm you feel settling into your body and mind. Each petal, each bar of soap, each flickering lantern participates in this delicate, nocturnal choreography. You rise slowly, brushing imaginary dust from your hands, and step back to observe the courtyard as a whole. Lanterns glow warmly, grapevine leaves sway gently, Sabin rests near the fountain, and the soaps sit in perfect alignment. Everything exists in quiet harmony, a testament to the care and patience invested across centuries of Ottoman craftsmanship. You take a slow, deep breath, letting the serenity of the evening envelop you fully, knowing the night is complete, the soaps are at rest, and the rhythm of this ancient craft will continue uninterrupted at dawn. You linger near the center of the courtyard, letting the ambient scents of olive oil, lavender, and rose wrap around you like a soft, fragrant blanket. The lanterns above sway gently in the night breeze, casting a warm glow that shifts and flickers over the cobblestones and drying racks. Everything feels slow, deliberate, and alive in subtle ways. The rustling grapevine leaves, the distant murmur of nocturnal life, even the quiet breathing of Sabin, curled near the fountain. You inhale deeply, letting the scents and gentle sounds settle your mind and body into the rhythm of this peaceful Ottoman evening. Approaching the drying racks, you notice the subtle differences between bars. Lavender is firm, its faint aroma delicate yet persistent, while the rose bars exude a soft, sweet fragrance that lingers in the cool night air. The saffron-tinted soaps shimmer warmly in the lantern light, their golden hue almost glowing against the shadowed stone. Picking up a lavender bar, you roll it gently in your palms, noting its smooth yet slightly yielding texture, the hallmark of proper curing. A mainstream historical fact surfaces: Ottoman soap makers often evaluated texture and scent over multiple nights, ensuring each batch met strict guild standards for quality and consistency. Sabin, ever present, prowls silently between the racks, her paws making almost no sound against the stone floor. She pauses, tail upright, to sniff a rose-scented bar, then moves on, her curiosity measured and deliberate. You remember the quirky belief that cats absorbed negative energy from the soap as it cured. Historians still debate how widespread this practice was, yet the presence of Sabin adds a comforting, almost ritualistic element to the courtyard, blending companionship with gentle superstition. You crouch, adjusting a few bars for optimal airflow, moving slowly and carefully. Each soap is unique, bearing subtle imprints from molds and hands that worked with them. You notice a small spiral on a lavender bar, a playful signature from an apprentice. A quirky tidbit comes to mind: some makers historically embedded tiny symbols or shapes in their soaps, stars, crescents, or even miniature animals, as personal marks, messages, or charms. Whether functional or decorative, these small flourishes add warmth and character to the craft, connecting you to artisans across centuries. Your attention drifts to the fountain, its water reflecting the lanterns in soft, wavy patterns. You dip a fingertip into the cool surface, feeling the gentle ripple extend outward. The sensory elements of the courtyard, the scent, light, sound, and subtle movements, interact like a carefully choreographed meditation. Mainstream historical observations note that Ottoman courtyards often incorporated plants, water, and lantern placement to regulate humidity and create a calming workspace, intentionally or not. A breeze moves through the grapevine overhead, scattering petals slowly across the courtyard. They drift with deliberate slowness, landing gently near the drying racks. You watch them, noticing how the smallest movements of nature contribute to the overall cadence of the evening. Each petal, each soap bar, each lantern shadow participates in the quiet symphony, grounding you further in the rhythm of the night. Rising slowly, you take a step back and survey the courtyard. Lanterns glow warmly, grapevine leaves quiver softly, sabin rests quietly, and the soaps align in calm, fragrant order. The scene is serene, a living testament to centuries of careful practice and ritual. You take a deep, steady breath, feeling the calm sink fully into your chest, knowing the night's work is complete, the soaps are resting, and the rhythm of this timeless craft will continue as it has for generations. You step lightly toward the workshop doorway, fingers brushing the rough stone wall as you move. The courtyard seems suspended in the quiet rhythm of night, the lanterns casting a warm amber glow that shifts gently with every sway. The scents of olive oil, lavender, rose, and faint saffron mingle in the cool air, creating a layered perfume that calms both mind and body. Every subtle sound, the rustle of leaves, a distant footfall, the soft trickle of water from the fountain, feels amplified in the stillness, contributing to the meditative pace of your evening. Approaching the drying racks, you inspect the soap bars closely. Lavender bars are now fully firmed, their aroma delicate and soothing. Rose-scented soaps emit a gentle sweetness, while saffron bars shimmer in the lantern light, their golden hue glowing warmly against the cobblestones. You lift a lavender bar, rolling it gently in your palms. Its smooth surface and slight elasticity indicate a perfectly cured piece. A mainstream historical fact comes to mind: Ottoman soap makers often monitored batches over several nights to ensure ideal firmness, scent consistency, and longevity, balancing patience with precision. Sabin, your silent feline companion, prowls across the courtyard. She pauses at a low shelf, whiskers twitching, before moving on. You smile, recalling the belief that cats could absorb negative energy from soap. Historians still debate whether this practice was widely held or anecdotal, but her calm presence adds both comfort and subtle levity to the night. Watching her, you feel the rhythm of life flowing alongside the rhythm of craft. You crouch to adjust a few bars, ensuring proper spacing for airflow. Each bar carries evidence of its making: faint ridges from molds, slight variations in hue, and delicate imprints from hands that shaped them. A quirky tidbit drifts into your mind: some soap makers embedded miniature symbols or charms in their bars, a secret signature or playful message. Historians still argue whether these marks were primarily practical or decorative, yet their presence adds a charming intimacy to the work, connecting maker to observer. The fountain ripples softly in the corner, reflecting the lantern light in undulating patterns across the courtyard stones. You dip a fingertip into the water, letting the ripple extend outward slowly. Every element, the soft fragrance, gentle light, subtle sounds, and slow movements, melds into a calm, meditative atmosphere. Mainstream sources note that Ottoman courtyards were designed to optimize airflow, humidity, and ambience, which likely contributed to both the craft and the artisan's mental clarity. A light breeze lifts, shaking grapevine leaves and scattering a few petals across the ground. You watch them drift lazily, landing near the drying racks, each movement deliberate, unhurried. The interplay of light, scent, and motion feels like a silent symphony, a carefully orchestrated evening performance you are now part of. Finally, you straighten, taking a step back to survey the courtyard. Lanterns glow softly, grapevine leaves sway gently, sabin rests quietly near the fountain, and the soaps are perfectly arranged. Everything breathes together in quiet harmony, a living testament to centuries of careful work and mindfulness. You inhale deeply, letting the serenity of this nocturnal ritual sink fully into your being, knowing the soaps rest, the night is calm, and tomorrow will continue the gentle rhythm of the Ottoman workshop. You drift toward the quieter side of the courtyard, where the stone pathway narrows and the shadows stretch long and soft beneath the lanterns. The coolness of the night gathers here, settling gently against your skin as you run your fingertips along the textured wall. The air carries that familiar mixture of olive oil, lavender, rosewater, and faint saffron, a calming blend that seems to slow your thoughts with each inhale. You can hear the soft trickle of the fountain behind you, steady and comforting, marking time in the most unhurried way imaginable. You pause beside another drying rack, noticing how the soaps have continued their slow transformation. Lavender bars sit confidently, firm and smooth, giving off a scent that feels like a whisper of calm. The rose bars, warmer and sweeter, hold a subtle blush in their hue, while the saffron soaps glow faintly gold in the lantern light. You lift one of the saffron bars and feel its weight. Solid but not too heavy, the sign of a batch that cured beautifully. A mainstream historical fact drifts into your mind. Saffron, prized in Ottoman trade markets, was sometimes used in luxury soaps for wealthier households, signaling both refinement and aromatic indulgence. Sabin appears again, padding silently across the cobblestones like a tiny guardian of calm. She pauses beside a partially dried lavender bar, gives it one leisurely sniff, and then looks at you with an expression of extreme feline evaluation. You smile and whisper, "Thanks for your approval, quality control officer." She offers no reaction, classic cat behavior, before settling beneath the grapevine, her tail curling neatly around her paws. You recall that quirky belief about cats absorbing unwanted energy from curing soaps. Historians still argue whether this idea had ritual significance or simply emerged because cats refused to leave workshops where warm oil and soft surfaces existed. Either way, Sabin seems entirely committed to her nightly supervision. You crouch once more to adjust the spacing between the bars, fingers moving gently and deliberately. Each piece holds subtle variations, an imprint from the mold here, a tiny ridge from the apprentice's careful smoothing there. Your thumb grazes a faint crescent-shaped stamp, a familiar reminder of the small personal marks artisans would press into their soaps. A quirky tidbit surfaces. Some families use these marks as informal branding, recognizable among local buyers even without logos or paperwork. It creates a charming sense of continuity, an identity wrapped in olive oil and fragrance. The lantern nearest you wobbles in the breeze, casting shifting shadows across the courtyard. You watch the golden light glide over the stones, illuminating small details you didn't notice before. The faint stain where last week's rosewater spilled, the soft scrape lines from moving racks, even a tiny chip in one of the floor tiles. Each imperfection feels like part of the story, part of the workshop's memory. Historians still debate whether these small irregularities reflect long-term use, deliberate design choices, or simply the unpredictable nature of handmade goods in centuries-old structures. The breeze lifts again, this time stronger, sending a cool ribbon of night air curling around you. It rustles the grapevine leaves and sends a small cascade of petals drifting downward. They fall slowly, almost theatrically, landing on the racks and cobblestones with soft taps. One petal rests perfectly on a saffron bar, adding a poetic flourish that would make any artisan smile. You gently pick it off and set it aside, joking softly, "Nice try, nature, but no bonus ingredients tonight." You take a few steps back toward the fountain, letting the rippling water come into view. Beneath the lantern glow, the surface shimmers like molten bronze, each ripple catching a shard of light. You crouch and dip your fingers in, savoring the coolness. The sound blends effortlessly with the soft night breeze, forming a calming rhythm that seems to settle your entire body. The sensory layering here, scent, sound, light, texture, feels like an intentionally designed lullaby, though mainstream records suggest it grew naturally from architectural traditions rather than deliberate sleep therapy. Behind you, the apprentice moves quietly, organizing molds and wiping the workbench with long, practiced sweeps. Their movements are slow and intentional, as if syncing with the courtyard's pace. You catch a hint of their soft humming again, folding seamlessly into the ambient soundscape. Historians still argue whether such humming was a typical workshop habit or simply a soothing quirk of individual artisans. Either way, it adds a human thread to the scene, a reminder that craft involves both hands and heart. Straightening, you take one final, sweeping look around. The lanterns glow warmly overhead, vines sway gently, soaps rest in perfect formation. Sabin dozes near the fountain, and the apprentice continues their quiet tasks. The courtyard feels alive, but in the softest possible way, breathing, settling, easing into the late hour. You draw a slow, deep breath and feel the calm sink deeper into your chest. The night's work is steady, peaceful, and nearly complete, each moment unfolding with deliberate serenity. You drift toward the outer edge of the courtyard, where the lantern light fades into softer, gentler shadows. The stones here feel cooler beneath your feet, as though they've been storing up quiet the entire evening just to offer it back to you now. The night air wraps around you, carrying the layered fragrances of lavender, rose, saffron, and olive oil, scents that have become so familiar at this point that you feel them settling into your breathing, your posture, even the slow cadence of your thoughts. You pause by a stack of unused wooden molds resting against the wall. Running your hand along their edges, you feel the craftsmanship in every groove. Some molds are plain rectangles, others have subtle embellishments along the sides, tiny geometric patterns, faint vines, or softly carved star shapes. A mainstream historical fact surfaces. Ottoman soap molds range from simple utilitarian blocks to intricately carved forms used for ceremonial or luxury batches, often reflecting regional aesthetics or guild traditions. You trace one of the carvings with your thumb, feeling the gentle precision of the artisan's touch, and imagine the hundreds of bars shaped by its quiet, steadfast presence. As you lift one mold to inspect it more closely, you notice a faint smudge on the interior, an imprint from a batch earlier in the week. It's a tiny swirl of olive oil residue, barely visible, but enough to prompt a soft chuckle. Evidence, you joke quietly to yourself, that even the most glamorous soap has messy beginnings. You set the mold back, making sure it aligns neatly with its companions. A quirky tidbit drifts into your mind. Some soap makers used molds as informal diaries, carving tiny symbols on the sides to mark seasons, moods, or noteworthy events. Historians still argue whether these markings were sentimental touches or simply ways to track batches efficiently, but either interpretation adds charm to the lineage of each piece. Nearby, Sabin emerges from a patch of ivy, stretching luxuriously before trotting over with the regal confidence only a workshop cat can muster. She brushes against your leg, then gives you a long, appraising blink before hopping onto a nearby stone ledge. You swear she's checking your craftsmanship, and honestly, she probably is. The belief that cats provided spiritual balance in craft spaces pops into your mind again. Whether superstition or just a practical appreciation for pest control, historians still debate the cultural depth of feline involvement in artisan workplaces. You shrug lightly and scratch behind her ears. You keep doing quality control, and I'll handle the molds, you whisper. The apprentice appears at the entrance of the workshop, balancing a tray of still, warm wooden tools. Their movements are slow and steady, a mirror of the courtyard's rhythm. You watch as they begin setting the tools on a low bench, scrapers, smoothing paddles, and small brass stamps. One stamp in particular catches your eye, a delicate tulip shape, its edges worn slightly from repeated use. You pick it up, feeling the cool metal against your palm. The tulip was a cherished symbol in Ottoman culture, often representing beauty, abundance, and refined taste. You imagine pressing it gently into a fresh batch of soft, warm soap, leaving behind a tiny emblem of elegance that someone, weeks later, will uncover with quiet delight. A breeze rolls through the courtyard, rustling grapevine leaves and sending a few more petals gliding downward. They land softly near the drying racks, where the soaps sit in beautiful formation. You walk over, surveying the rows again. Lavender's pale hues are comforting, rose bars radiate a faint warmth, saffron pieces glow like amber. You lift one of the rose bars, inhale its gentle sweetness, and feel a calm weight settle over your shoulders. You remember a mainstream historical observation: rosewater was frequently used in Ottoman households for both cleanliness and personal scent, prized for its soothing properties and subtle luxury. It's easy to imagine why, holding the bar, inhaling its fragrance, you feel the edges of your thoughts smoothing out like silk. You kneel and inspect the bars more closely, adjusting spacing and turning a few ever so slightly. In one corner of the rack, you notice an unusual bar, one with an irregular swirl in its center. You pick it up, amused. "A rebel," you murmur, lightly tapping the swirl with your thumb. A quirky tidbit rises in your mind occasionally. Apprentices would experiment with decorative pours, swirling different infused oils together to create patterns. Some guilds embraced this creativity, others claimed it introduced unnecessary excitement into a perfectly calm trade. Historians still argue whether these swirls marked early artistic expression or simply the playful mistakes of night shift apprentices. You glance over your shoulder and see the apprentice reorganizing tools again, humming quietly under their breath. The sound blends seamlessly with the fountain's gentle trickling, the rustle of leaves, and the soft hum of lantern flames. You walk toward the fountain, letting its light shimmer across your path. Kneeling, you dip your fingers into the cool water. The ripples radiate outward, catching lantern reflections and turning them into drifting gold fragments. The moment feels like a breathing lull, a pocket of stillness inside the already tranquil night. Imagine trying to stay awake during all this. You whisper to yourself, smiling. Not happening. You let the water trickle between your fingers as a sleepy joke drifts through your mind about Ottoman soap makers accidentally dozing off on warm drying racks. Standing slowly, you take in the courtyard again. The lanterns sway gently, grapevine shadows ripple softly across the stones, Sabin settles into a curl near the bench, and the apprentice hums while polishing a brass stamp. Everything, every scent, sound, tilting shadow, works together like a centuries-old lullaby crafted through routine, patience, and fragrant oils. You breathe deeply, letting the calm journey all the way to your spine. The night feels full and quiet and perfectly balanced, the kind of atmosphere that whispers rather than speaks, inviting you deeper into the slow, timeless rhythm of an Ottoman soap maker's world. You make your way toward the shaded corner of the courtyard where the night air gathers in cooler pockets, drifting gently around the base of a tall fig tree. Its leaves rustle with a soft, papery whisper that blends seamlessly with the fountain's trickling rhythm. You pause beneath it, letting the coolness wrap around your shoulders. The lanterns here cast softer light, more shadow than glow, turning the space into a kind of quiet alcove within the greater calm of the workshop. You lean against the low stone wall, feeling its smooth, time-polished surface against your back. From this vantage point, you can see the entire courtyard, the drying racks arranged in neat rows, each bar resting like a sleeping creature, the apprentice moving with unhurried diligence near the workshop door, Sabin curled in a perfect feline spiral near the fountain, and the grapevine arching above, its leaves casting soft, trembling shapes across the ground. You inhale deeply, letting the layered fragrances, lavender, rose, saffron, olive oil, settle into your chest like a slow, unfolding sigh. Your gaze drops to a small wooden crate beside the fig tree. Inside, bundles of herbs rest atop folded cloth: sage, mint, chamomile, bate, a lesser-known plant whose scent reminds you faintly of citrus. You kneel and lift one bundle of sage, feeling the brittle crispness of its dried leaves. A mainstream historical fact drifts into your mind. Ottoman artisans often burned sage or bay leaves in workshop courtyards, partly for the aroma, partly to keep insects at bay, and partly because the ritual itself had become a signal, an evening marker that told craftsmen it was time to wind down. You smile at the practicality disguised as tradition. As you set the sage aside, your hand brushes the citrus-scented bundle. It's called Nidarotu, though the name is rarely seen in modern herbals. Picking it up, you lift it to your nose and inhale. The scent brightens immediately, gentle, fresh, almost playful. A quirky tidbit surfaces: some soap makers believe this herb encouraged agreeable dreams when burned at night, which might explain why you're already imagining yourself dozing happily against the fig tree. Historians still argue whether this herb truly influenced sleep or simply made the courtyard smell extra pleasant, but either way, it feels fitting for such a serene setting. Curiosity nudges you to open one of the folded cloths beneath the herbs. You slide it aside carefully, revealing small clay discs with faint designs etched into them. You pick one up, examining its worn edges. The imprint is of a six-petaled flower surrounded by tiny dots. It dawns on you: these are aroma discs, porous clay pieces meant to be warmed slightly and infused with essential oils before being tucked between soap racks. You hold the disc in your palm, appreciating the gentle texture and its subtle weight. You turn to the apprentice, calling out softly, "Where are these used tonight?" The apprentice glances over, gives a small nod, and responds with a quiet, "Only lavender." Their voice is calm, barely louder than the rustling leaves, blending into the restful cadence of the courtyard. You look back down at the disc, imagining warmed oil seeping into its tiny pores, releasing fragrance over hours, each breath-like waft part of the curing ritual. You remember another mainstream observation: artisans valued controlled fragrance diffusion as much as the ingredients themselves. These little clay discs ensured the scent stayed consistent without overpowering the soap's natural olive base. You admire the combination of humble materials and practical ingenuity. As you're placing the disc back into the crate, you notice one with a faintly humorous carving, a cat with dramatically large whiskers. You laugh under your breath. "Let me guess," you murmur. "Sabin's distant ancestor." The apprentice glances over again, amused, and offers a tiny shrug as if to say, "Could be." You slip the disc back, still smiling. You rise slowly, brushing off your hands, and wander toward the fountain. The water glows under the lanterns, dancing in tiny, irregular ripples. You dip your fingertips into its cool surface again, watching the ripples expand outward in lazy circles. There's something deeply grounding about repeating this simple motion. The cool water, the shifting gold reflections, it all feels as though the courtyard itself is exiling around you. A gentle breeze pushes through, making the grapevine whisper more insistently. Petals drift down once more, gliding with the kind of patience only nature can manage. One petal lands on your shoulder, and you flick it off playfully. "I get it," you say softly. You're going for ambience. You stroll slowly back toward the drying racks, your steps echoing faintly in the courtyard's quiet openness. Each bar of soap looks like a polished stone now, its surface smooth by hours of settling. You run your fingertips across a row of lavender bars, noting their uniformity. Color, shape, scent, and firmness all aligning into a comforting visual rhythm. You think about the generations of artisans who tended to soaps in this very way, night after night, and you recall the ongoing scholarly debate about whether curing techniques varied significantly between regions or whether workshops shared more similarities than differences. There's no consensus, of course. Historians still argue whether regional distinctions were dramatic or subtle, but the universality of the quiet nighttime ritual feels unmistakable. Sabin lifts her head suddenly, eyes glowing in the lantern light, and lets out a soft, barely audible chirp. You walk over and scratch behind her ear, feeling the soft fur and her gentle lean into your hand. "You're doing a great job supervising," you whisper. She blinks slowly, which you take as confirmation. The apprentice finishes arranging tools, dusts off their hands, and gives a slight nod, your sign that tonight's final tasks are nearly complete. You take one last, long look around the courtyard. Lanterns glow warmly. Leaves sway in velvet shadows. Soap bars rest peacefully. The fountain murmurs, Sabin's tail curls lazily. Everything in this quiet corner of history feels tender, perfectly balanced, and deeply content. You inhale slowly, letting the calm sink into your ribs, your shoulders, your jaw. The night presses in softly, not heavy but comforting, like warm blankets layered over cool linen, and you feel yourself fall into the rhythm of the courtyard, steady, fragrant, ancient, and wonderfully sleepy. You drift from the courtyard's center toward the narrow hallway that leads into the storage chambers, letting your fingertips glide along the cool stone as you move. The transition from open night air to the gently enclosed corridor feels like stepping between breaths. The courtyard exhaling, the hallway inhaling. Lanterns here burn a little dimmer, their flames trembling behind thin paper shades patterned with delicate geometric cuts. Each step you take sounds softer than the last, as though the floor itself has decided to pad your tread in anticipation of sleep. The hallway opens into a long, rectangular room lined with wooden shelving. The shelves rise all the way to the ceiling, and on each one rests bundles of ingredients wrapped in Leninmore herbs, pressed flowers, small jars of oils, corked clay bottles filled with powdered pigments, and thicker sacks holding ingredients whose scents are strong enough to be recognized even through cloth. A gentle haze of aromas clings to the air, calming, warm, subtle. You breathe in, and a familiar olive note floats to the surface, followed by lavender, then something faintly resinous. You step toward one of the shelves and lift a folded linen bundle. Inside are small discs of frankincense, their surfaces cracked like tiny deserts. You remember a mainstream historical fact. Frankincense was prized throughout the empire not only for its ritual uses but for its role in perfumery and soap making. Artisans knew how to grind it into fine powder to bind scents more tightly into soap mixtures, keeping the fragrance stable as the bar dried. Setting the bundle down, you tap one disc lightly. It rings softly, like a polite knock on a tiny door. On the next shelf sits a bowl of dried orange rinds, cut into spirals so perfect you suspect someone in the workshop took way too much pride in them. You lift one and give it a gentle sniff. The brightness surprises you, still sharp despite the dryness. A quirky tidbit surfaces. Some workshops would string dried citrus shapes onto thin threads and hang them across storage rooms like garlands, believing the cheerful scent kept workers in better moods during long, dull hours. You picture the apprentice earlier, expression serene, but maybe one citrus garland away from an actual smile. You walk deeper into the storage room, brushing aside a curtain of hanging linen strips that sway softly over your forehead. The space beyond is even quieter, with shelves arranged in a horseshoe around a low table. On the table sits a single, large ledger bound in worn leather. You run your hand over its cover, feeling the ridges where dozens, maybe hundreds, of hands have done the same over the decades. You pull out the small wooden stool, sit, and carefully open the ledger. Pages crackle faintly, each one dense with neat handwriting. Ingredient lists, notes on curing times, symbols you can't interpret but pretend you can because it makes you feel smarter. There are even sketches, flowers, leaves, simple diagrams of soap molds, and one doodle of what appears to be a grumpy-looking donkey. You quietly appreciate that even 300 years ago, people were doodling in their work notebooks like bored students. As you trace a finger along one of the diagrams, you stumble across something unusual, 4 different curing temperatures listed for the same recipe. Your brow lifts. A scholarly debate comes to mind. Historians still argue whether Ottoman workshops intentionally varied curing methods based on the season or whether these adjustments reflected individual artisan preferences rather than standardized practice. You tilt your head, considering the possibility that maybe it just depended on whoever felt like tinkering that day. You wouldn't blame them. You've adjusted the thermostat at home for far pettier reasons. Leaving the ledger open, you reach toward a row of small clay jars with their contents labeled in tidy calligraphy. You uncork one and inhale. The scent is earthy, warm, unmistakably sandalwood. You lift another, rose petals, then saffron, then a spicy blend you can't quite place. You hold the jar closer and sneeze. The echo feels almost embarrassing in such a serene space. You mutter a quiet apology to the shelves, because that somehow feels appropriate. Across the table sits a small brass lamp, shaped like a dome, the top perforated with tiny stars. You lift it carefully and discover a small compartment beneath, charred faintly at the edges. You smile. It's an aroma warmer. Just place a drop of oil inside, light the wick, and let the room fill slowly with scent. You imagine the room glowing gently, perfumed with lavender or saffron, drifting into the hallway like a promise of rest. You set the lamp down and slide the tiny stars with your thumb, amused that everything here, from lamp to ledger to grumpy donkey doodle, seems designed to make the night feel softer. You rise from the stool and wander toward the far shelves where sacks of dried flowers tower like sleepy sentinels. You press a hand into one sack, feeling the give of layered petals beneath your fingertips. A puff of scent rises, rose this time, warm and powdery. You think about how artisans would blend these dried petals with warm water to create infusions that softened soap mixtures and added subtle color. Even now, the scent seems alive. As you walk back toward the center table, you notice a small metal box tucked beneath it. Curious, you pull it out. Its lid squeaks softly as you open it, and inside sits a collection of wax seals and a small pot of deep red dye. You lift one seal, recognizing the emblem of the workshop, a stylized olive branch framed by a crescent. You thumb its smooth metal surface, imagining the artisans pressing these seals into packed crates before they were shipped across the empire. You even imagine them sealing personal notes. Though based on the donkey doodle, you suspect some may have sealed jokes too. Stepping back from the table, you close the ledger gently and stand in the warm hush of the storage room. Everything around you feels purposeful yet unhurried, organized but not stiff. The room smells like decades of thoughtful hands, careful work, and quiet pride. You feel the calm settle deeper into your body, your breath slowing as the restful atmosphere wraps itself around you. You give the shelves one last lingering glance before walking back toward the hallway. The lanterns flicker as you pass, casting shifting shapes across the corridor walls, soft, gentle, soothing. You emerge once again into the courtyard, and the cool air greets you like an old friend. Sabin lifts her head in recognition, blinking slowly as if checking to make sure you didn't steal any treats. You reassure her with a gentle scratch under the chin. You step back into the courtyard with the awareness that the night has settled into its deepest, most velvety blue. The lanterns have burned lower, their flames now soft and slow like tiny hearts beating in sleep. The fountain's rhythm feels gentler too, each splash a rounded whisper, each ripple a lazy sigh. Sabin curls herself on a woven mat beside the grapevine's base, paws tucked neatly under her chest, like she's guarding the final stretch of your long, quiet journey. You walk across the courtyard, hands brushing the tops of the drying racks one last time. The soaps, now firm and fragrant, hold their shapes with confidence. You can smell the lavender most clearly, soft, clean, drifting through the air like a reminder that the night belongs to calm things. You pick up a saffron bar, turning it slowly in your hand. The golden color deepens since earlier, settling into a warm amber tone. A mainstream historical fact floats up: saffron wasn't just a spice or colorant. In the Ottoman world, it was a subtle mark of refinement. Even soap, humble as it may seem, could carry signals of status through scent and hue. Holding the bar now, you understand why artisans took such pride in it. A gentle breeze carries the faintest scent of rose from the molds along the wall. You glance at them, noticing a few uneven edges on the corner bars. Maybe the apprentice was getting sleepy earlier. You smile, indulging in the thought that even centuries ago, someone struggled to keep their eyelids open during the quiet tasks. Then a quirky tidbit resurfaces. Some workshops supposedly had a game where apprentices guessed scents blindfolded, earning small privileges for correct answers. You imagine the previous generation of soap makers laughing softly as they held tiny bowls to one another's noses, perhaps misidentifying cinnamon as clove or rose as pomegranate. Historians still argue whether these scent games were common practice or workshop folklore, but standing here, you'd like to believe they were real. The courtyard feels like the kind of place where laughter could gently coexist with work. You move toward the grapevine, letting a low, hanging leaf brush your cheek. The vines twist like soft lines drawn by a patient hand, climbing the walls, embracing the courtyard the way a blanket wraps someone settling in for the night. You lean against the stone wall beside them, feeling the faint coolness seep into your back. Everything around you carries a sense of completion. Not an ending, exactly, but a quiet settling. The soaps are drying, the tools are resting, the oil jars are sealed, the ledger is closed, and the workshop feels like a living creature preparing to sleep. A lantern near the fountain flickers extra softly, casting a pattern of trembling light across the water surface. You watch it as you breathe slowly. Ripples shift the reflection until it looks like the lantern is swimming beneath the water rather than floating beside it. The illusion is oddly comforting. You crouch and trail your fingers across the surface, watching tiny droplets cling to your skin. The water is cool, and for a moment you imagine the dozens of artisans who once cooled their hands in the same fountain after stirring oils or carrying hot molds. Behind you, Sabin stretches, her spine arching high before she sinks back down into her loaf-like shape. You take a step toward her and she blinks in that slow, regal way cats use when they've decided you're tolerable. You kneel, giving her a gentle scratch between the ears. She purrs quietly, not loud, not emphatic, just enough to say, "Yes, human, proceed." Her presence feels like a final blessing from the workshop. You stand again and walk toward the workshop doorway, your steps naturally slowing as the courtyard's soothing atmosphere presses deeper into your senses. The walls breathe warmth, the air hums with soft fragrance. The night folds around you like a curtain drawn halfway shut. You reach toward the drying racks one last time, brushing your fingertips along the smooth edges of the soaps, grounding yourself in the texture, the scent, the rhythm of work now complete. You inhale deeply, filling your lungs with lavender, rose, and a faint thread of sandalwood. The scents merge into a tapestry of calm. You hold the breath for a few seconds, then release it in a long, unhurried sigh. You know the night outside the workshop continues. Markets cooling down, guards pacing slowly along walls, distant sea breezes rolling inland. Yet here, this courtyard feels like a still pocket in the world, a place where time has decided to simply exhale. You take one final look around: the lanterns, the grapevine, the fountain, the soaps, the quiet cat, the ancient rhythms of work and care, all of it forming a picture of gentle, grounded living. You feel yourself soften into that image as the last threads of tension unwind. And with that, the journey drifts gently toward its close. Let yourself settle now, easing into a slower, deeper rhythm. The courtyard fades gently, the scents softening into distant traces, lavender becoming a memory against your cheek, rose thinning into the cool night air, saffron lingering like the faintest warmth on the horizon of your thoughts. You can still hear the fountain if you listen closely, but its sound has smoothed into something more like a whisper, a steady reassurance that you can release whatever weight you're carrying. Your steps grow lighter in your imagination, the stone beneath you warm and familiar. The lanterns dim further, their golden glow stretching into long, soft shapes that flicker just enough to guide your breathing. In and out, slow and slower. The patterns of light drift toward the edges of your awareness, becoming shapes you no longer need to follow. Even the air seems calmer now, as though the night has wrapped around you to offer a final, gentle embrace. The grapevine's leaves rustle softly, almost like someone smoothing out a blanket over your shoulders. Every small sound, Sabin's faint purr, the soft whisper of wind, the subtle settling of the workshop, melts together into a single, comforting hush. Your body feels heavier in the best way, as if the ground itself is gently holding you up, reminding you that rest is not only allowed but earned. Let your breathing soften, each inhale drifting a little deeper, each exhale stretching a little longer. The courtyard fades further, not disappearing, just settling peacefully behind you like a closed book at your bedside. Everything is calm now, everything is quiet, and you are safe to drift.